The day before my wedding, standing in the front room of the house I had built with my own 2 hands, my fiancée told me she had found true love. She said it the way you tell someone it looks like rain. I asked her what she meant. When she only looked at me, calm and a little bored, I asked again. Serena told me plainly that her heart belonged to someone else now, that the engagement was over, and that she was sorry only in the way people are sorry about the weather. I had spent years on this, not on wedding plans, on her. On the Hartwell Trading Company, her father left half drowned in debt when he died. I had gone to nobles I owed nothing to and called in favors I would never get back, quietly, so the orders would keep coming and her family name would keep standing. I never told her the details. I thought she knew. I thought that was what it meant to marry someone. I said some of that out loud, not all of it, just enough. She waved it away. In her telling, the company recovered because she worked hard. The good years were her doing, or luck, or the natural order of things. My part in it did not appear in the story at all. I stood in the house I had paid for, listening to a version of the last 3 years that had erased me completely, and I understood something I should have understood a long time before. She had never seen the work. She had only felt neglected while I did it. Then the door to the back room opened, and my younger brother walked out. Damon crossed the floor like he owned it, put his arm around Serena, and grinned at me. He told me, almost gently, that it had been him all along, that he and Serena had been together quietly since her father passed, that this was, in his words, all his doing. I looked at the 2 of them standing there, my brother's arm around the woman I was going to marry, and the strangest thing happened. I waited for the anger, and it came, but it came cold, flat, like a forge you have stopped feeding. Damon kept talking. He told me the house was theirs now. He had no money of his own. He said it like a joke, so it only made sense that he keep the place I had built. Then he told me Serena was carrying his child, and he watched my face when he said it, hoping it would break. I told him he had to be kidding. "I'm leaving," I said. "I don't want to see either of your faces again." That should have been the end of it. It was not. Because Serena, hearing that I meant to walk away, said the one thing I will remember longer than any of the rest of it. She asked me not to quit the shop. She said I could go. I could leave the house, leave the wedding, leave her, but that I should keep coming to the forge in the mornings, keep making the weapons, keep the orders flowing for the company that would now belong to her and my brother. That was the moment, not the betrayal, not the pregnancy, the anvil. They were throwing me out of my own life and asking me to keep working it for them because in their heads, I was not a person who had lost something. I was a tool that had been misplaced and needed putting back. The cold went all the way through me and came out the other side as something very quiet. Fine, I thought. Keep the house, keep the shop, keep all of it. I did not argue. There was nothing left in the room worth arguing with. I crossed to the wall where my grandfather's hammer hung, the one thing in that house that was truly mine, and I took it down. Damon said something about handling the smithing himself. Easy, no trouble at all. I did not answer him. My brother had never once done a real day of forge work in his life, and we both knew it, and only one of us understood yet what that was going to cost. "I'm done," I told them. "Stop trying to stop me." Nobody tried to stop me. I walked out the door I had hung myself into the last of the daylight, and I did not look back at either of them. Here is the part they did not know. They thought they had thrown out a blacksmith, an overworked, plain-faced man with rough hands and messy hair, useful in the way a good pair of tongs is useful, and just as easy to replace. That was the man they saw walk to the gate. It was not the man who reached it, because the shop had a name above its door that neither of them had ever really looked at. Worldsmith. Not a first-class craftsman, not a master, the Worldsmith. The single title given to the one greatest maker in the realm, the one whose hands keep the things a kingdom cannot live without. Every hero's holy sword, the great barrier that wraps the capital and keeps what lives outside the walls from coming in. The finest blade in every noble house. All of it passed across my anvil, quietly, in the dark hours, because my grandfather Gideon carried this before me and taught me that the work mattered more than the credit, and that the world was safest when it did not know whose hands were holding it up. I had been holding it up for years. Every early morning, they thought I was wasting on a merchant's small orders. I had been somewhere else entirely, doing the work no one was allowed to see. The barrier I had last mended would stand for one more year, and then it would need me again. The hero's swords would hold until the day they were swung too hard against something old and terrible, and then they would need me again. The A-rank contracts in a dozen noble halls were not signed to a shop. They were signed to me, personally, because it was my hands they trusted, and no one else's would do. And I was walking away from every one of them. Not in anger in the end, just because there was finally no reason left to stay. I stepped through the gate and out onto the street, my grandfather's hammer over my shoulder, owing nothing to anyone for the first time in my life. Behind me, the house sat exactly as it had a minute before. The lamps were the same. The sign was the same. Nothing looked any different at all, but something had already begun. In every holy sword and every stone of that barrier and every contract that rested on my name, a crack too fine for any eye to catch had started to open. None of them could feel it yet. Not my brother, not Serena, not the whole comfortable capital sleeping behind its wall. The one thing keeping their world from coming apart had just picked up his hammer and gone. I turned up the street toward the edge of the city, and I let them have all of it. I was not there for what came next. I put it together afterward, the way you piece a thing together from what people let slip. But I know how it went because I know my brother. The moment the door shut behind me, Damon laughed, alone, to himself, the laugh of a man who has finally won a game he has been playing his whole life. In his mind, he had just taken everything from the brother he hated, the bride, the house, the shop, the name. The hatred was old. It went back to when we were boys. Our father, blunt as he always was, once sat Damon down and told him the truth as he saw it, that I had been born a once-in-a-millennium talent, a bearer of the thing called the golden hand, and that Damon had no such gift and would have to make himself through honest work instead of copying me. Our father meant it as guidance. Damon heard it as a sentence. From that day, he stopped trying to build anything of his own and poured everything he had into the one project that felt like justice, taking mine. Now, he thought he finally had. He stood in my shop, in the lamplight, telling Serena how simple it would all be. He would run the forge. He would fill the orders. He would take his brother's place, and no one would ever know the difference. Serena, for her part, was already uneasy, though she could not have said why. She scolded him for something small. The good years, in her head, were still hers. Neither of them noticed that the shop had gone very quiet without the sound of a hammer in the back. Then the door opened again, and the evening turned. A woman came in with red hair and a bouquet of roses, dressed in a way that made both of them straighten without deciding to. Princess Eleanor. She had come, roses and all, to congratulate the shop's craftsman on his new home and his coming marriage. She was fond of his work. She was, though neither of them knew it, fond of a good deal more than his work. She asked for the Worldsmith. Damon did not know the word. She saw that at once. She asked for me by name instead, and Serena, recovering her manners, greeted the princess the way you greet an important customer, only for Eleanor to look at her with the mild, distant recognition you give to a middleman you have half forgotten, the handler of Adrian's goods, nothing more. My brother, unable to keep it in, told her the rest with a kind of pride. The engagement was broken. Adrian was gone. The shop was his now, and he would be filling the orders from here on. For one breath, the princess said nothing. Then she looked at Damon. Not the polite look he expected. She looked at his hands, and at the work laid out on the counter, and at the man standing in the Worldsmith's place, and she read every bit of it in the time it takes to read a signature. I have handled her judgments before. She does not need long. She laughed, softly, almost to herself. With that level of skill, she murmured. Damon did not understand the question, so he did what he always did. He filled the silence with a boast. He told her not to worry, that he would take over his brother's role and its every duty, that he would take full responsibility. He said it grinning. He had no idea what the role was. He did not know he had just promised to hold up a barrier he could not so much as feel, to mend swords he could not sharpen, to be the thing his brother had been. The princess did not correct him. She simply turned toward the door, roses still in her hand, and the warmth went out of the room with her. Out on the step, she stopped being polite entirely. She gave 2 orders to the people who traveled with her, quiet and quick. The first, find Adrian. He could not have gone far, and she wanted him found before word of any of this reached anyone who might want him to. She named no rivals. She did not have to. The second she gave, without a flicker of feeling, the way you close an account that has stopped being worth keeping. Halt every contract with the Hartwell Trading Company, she said. At once, the brothers' work is the lowest there is. The weapons that shop makes now are not worth buying. And that was the first crack, the one you could actually see. Not the swords out in the world, not the barrier around the city, not yet. Just a princess on a doorstep, ending the flow of royal gold into a shop before the man who had ruined it had even finished celebrating. Inside, Damon was still grinning at a door that had just closed on his future. I did not know any of this yet. I was already past the last houses of the capital, out where the road runs into open country, my grandfather's hammer on my shoulder, and the whole city behind me, not yet awake. aware of a thing. For the first time in as long as I could remember, no one was owed my hands. No barrier, no sword, no contract, no bride, no brother. Just me and the road and the hammer. I did not know yet what I was going to build with it, but I knew, walking out under the first stars, that everything I made from here on was going to be mine. I stopped walking when the capital was just a gray smudge of rooftops behind me, and I sat down at the edge of a wood to let the quiet catch up. No forge waited for me in the morning, no quota, no delivery, no barrier to mend before it thinned to nothing. For the first time in my life, nobody was owed my hands, and the strangeness of that sat heavier than the whole night of walking had. My grandfather came to me then, the way he always did when I stopped moving. Gideon, the worldsmith before me, dead these many years, who forged the hammer I carried. He used to hold it up in his rough fingers and tell me the truth no one in the capital ever knew, that the maintenance work, the swords, and the barrier, and the noble contracts, none of it was the real charge of a worldsmith. My father started that business later, because a family needs coin. The true mission was older than that, and simpler, and far larger, to create, to forge divine artifacts and offer them up to heaven, the way our line had done since before the kingdom had a name. I had spent years doing the small work instead, propping up other people's failing things, quietly, so no one would notice how much leaned on me. My father's last words came next. He never had the golden hand himself, so the title skipped past him to me, and I think that shamed him a little, though he never said so. On the night he died, he held my wrist and told me that if I ever left the shop, I could live however I liked. The shop did not matter, he said. Anyone could be trained to grind a blade, but the name and the mission of the worldsmith could be finished by exactly one person in the world, the one carrying the mark. I turned my hand over and looked at it. The sun crest sat on the back of it, 5 thin lines running down to my fingers, 5 creation skills, where every worldsmith before me had been born with one. Fine, I thought. I would go and see the world and gather whatever a man needs to gather, and somewhere out there, I would forge the one thing that was only mine to make. I picked a pebble out of the dirt. Through Mjolnir, I woke the first skill, super alchemy, the one that turns a thing into another thing of like nature. And the pebble in my palm became a teleport crystal, clear and faceted and humming faintly. Then I remembered the catch. An ordinary crystal only carries you somewhere you have already been, and everywhere I had already been was behind me and full of people I never wanted to see again. So I pushed the skill a step further and reshaped it into a drift crystal, the kind that throws you to a place you have never stood, chosen by nothing but chance. 2 more pebbles I turned to gold, enough to travel on, not enough to tip a single market. An old bearer of the golden hand had once flooded a city with gold and wrecked its coin for a generation. I had no wish to be remembered that way. Then I closed my fist on the drift crystal and I let it take me. The world folded and dropped me into full dark. Night everywhere, the air thick with pine and rot. The branches knitted so tight overhead that only scraps of starlight got through. Somewhere close, a scream tore the quiet open. A woman's voice, raw with the certainty that no one was coming. I was already moving before I had decided to. I came through the trees into a small hollow and saw it. Something huge and low-shouldered, all muscle and teeth, closing on a figure pinned against a fallen trunk. She had thrown one arm up over her face. She could not run, and I could see why even at a glance, in the wrong angle of her leg. "Stop!" I said, and swung. One strike. The hammer came down, and the beast was simply gone from the world, the way a wave is gone after it breaks. No struggle, nothing to watch. I had ended larger things than that without meaning to. Then it was quiet again, and the woman was staring at me. She was beast folk, wolf, by the pointed ears and the long broom of a tail, both of them low and flat with fear. Blue hair, tangled past all combing, thin in a way that had nothing to do with how she was born, and everything to do with how she had been kept. One leg bent wrong under her. One arm hung dead at her side. Bruises stood out dark on her skin, even in that poor light. And around her throat, a band of black metal, tight and wrong, that she moved one hand to cover the moment she saw me notice it. Off to the side, where the dark pooled thickest, there was a great deal of blood that was not hers. Enough to tell me the rest of it without a word. She had been someone's captive, and whoever had been dragging her through this forest had met that same beast first and had not walked away. She watched me, the way you watch a second predator arrive, not hoping, just counting how much worse it might get. I crouched a little way off, out of reach, so she could see my hands. "Easy now. Are you all right?" She didn't answer. Her eyes went to the hammer, then back to my face. "You're hurt," I nodded toward her throat. And that thing. Hold still a moment. I'm not going to touch you. The band was a cursed restraint. I had seen their like before. They are built so that any hand which tries to wrench one off pays for it, the wearer worst of all. You do not pull them, you take them apart. I brought Mjolnir close, not to her, to the metal, and used the gentle face of the destruction skill, decomposition, the one that unmakes a thing along its own seams instead of shattering it. The band came undone, curse and all, and fell away in pieces into the leaves. Her hand flew to her bare throat. What did you just do? Her voice cracked from disuse. I didn't even see it. Now the rest, I told her. I laid 2 fingers as light as I could near the ruined leg. Full repair. The wound closed the way a wound closes when I ask it to. The leg straightened. The dead arm woke. The bruises thinned and were gone. She gasped, grabbed the arm, moved it once and then again, staring like it belonged to a stranger. Then, because the night was cold and she was in no state to walk anywhere, I put my hand flat to the fallen trunk and let super alchemy run through it. The dead wood stood up and grew and squared itself into a small log house, door and roof and all, right there in the hollow. That broke her. "What is that?" she said, and it came out almost as a laugh, the fear knocked clean out of her by sheer disbelief. I told her the truth, or the shape of it, that I was a blacksmith formerly, with a few unusual circumstances, and that she was welcome to come inside and eat something and get warm. She looked at the house and at me, and something in her let go. She bowed her head, careful and formal, like it was the last courtesy she had left to give. Her name was Piper, she said, and then quieter. "Thank you for saving me. It had been a long time since anyone thanked me for anything but the work." I did not quite know what to do with how much it landed. Inside, I ran the Grant skill through the walls and worked warmth into the grain of the wood, so the house held its heat like a banked fire. From my storage, I set out furniture, a table, 2 chairs, a soft bed in the corner. Piper turned a slow circle in the middle of it, and her tail lifted for the first time, no longer flat with fear. Adrian. I had given her my name by then. This house is wonderful and so warm. I made her a bath next, a tub and a pipe that ran hot water at the turn of a tap. She stood in front of it like it might bite her. When the water came out steaming, she made a sound I can only call delighted, and I turned my back and left her the room. None of it was work to me. Making a thing is like moving my own arm. I picture it, and my hand already knows the way. I never once had to understand why the water came out hot. It simply did what I asked. While she washed, I turned a handful of raw stores into a proper meal, a baked gratin and a stew gone soft and dark, and warm bread besides. She came out wrapped in the clothes I had made her, sat down, and ate like someone learning all over again that food could be a good thing and not a thing that was rationed out. Halfway through, she stopped with the spoon partway up. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked. She said it plainly, the way she said everything. "You don't want anything from me. Are you a god or something?" I nearly laughed. "I'm no god, just a craftsman, a slightly unusual one." She kept looking at me, waiting for the real answer, so I gave her my father's. He used to say a craftsman makes things for one reason underneath all the other reasons. To make people smile, not to be paid, not to be praised, not to be needed, just that. I had spent years forgetting it in a shop that measured me by the count of blades I turned out in a day. Watching Piper eat in a warm house she had not been dragged into, I remembered the whole of it. She didn't say anything clever back. She only smiled at me, wide and unguarded, and thanked me again for the house, for the food, for all of it. And that old ache in me turned over and settled somewhere easier. She slept that night in a soft bed, warm and full and safe. And by the sound of her, she slept the way you only sleep when some deep part of you has finally decided nothing is coming for you in the dark. I sat up a while with the quiet. A day before, I had been the most necessary man in the capital and the least thanked in it. Now, I owned a hammer, a log house, 2 gold ingots, and the plain gratitude of one person who had nothing at all to gain by giving it. I could not for the life of me tell you which of those lives was the richer. I was not there for what came next, back in the capital. I only heard it later, some of it from the heroes who came looking for me, most of it from Caroline herself, who told it the way she told everything, flat and without softening a single edge. That same day, far off over a grassland, the ice hero had just finished freezing 100 ancient dragons where they stood. A whole horde, the kind that could have ended the night order to the last man, left standing like statues in the frost. The knights arrived to a field of ice and could barely find their voices. She had not done it for them, or for the kingdom, or for any reward the treasury could offer. Her sword had chipped in the fighting, and a chipped sword was the one excuse she let herself use to go and see the man who kept it whole. That man was me. Her sword spirit knew the truth of it. Frost, who can show herself as a small white cat, and only Caroline can see her. rode on her shoulder through the capital, and teased her the whole way there. "Off to see your prince again," Frost said, curling her tail. "You felled 100 dragons just for a reason to knock on his door, and you know it." Caroline didn't deny it. She only hummed under her hood and walked faster. She reached the shop and knocked, expecting me. My brother answered the door. He didn't know her face at first, and then he did, and I can picture the way he drew himself up when it landed. He told her, proud of it, that his brother had been let go, that he was the master of this place now, and whatever I had done here, he could do just as well. Caroline asked him to say it again. He said it again. I am told the air in that shop dropped so fast the windows went white. Whatever stood on the shelves, the finished blades, the orders due out that very afternoon, every piece of stock in the room cracked and frosted and came apart into glittering powder across the floor. She never raised her voice to do it. She looked at my brother across a room full of ruin and said, "I won't forgive this. Not ever." He still didn't understand what he was standing in front of. That was the part that undid them in the end. Not the cruelty, the not understanding. He should have gone to the floor and begged. Instead, he decided she was only sore that her usual repairman had gone, and he offered to service the holy sword himself right then to prove he was every bit the equal of the brother he had thrown out. Frost, on Caroline's shoulder, told her flatly that he could not do it, but Caroline let him try. I think part of her wanted the whole room to see exactly what had been thrown away. She handed the sword across and promised him payment if he managed it. He took it to the wheel and set to grinding, hard and fast, the way you would sharpen a cheap axe. A holy sword is not a cheap axe. There is a spirit living in the steel, and Frost felt every stroke of it. "Stop!" she screamed. "Too hard! You're hurting her!" Caroline heard it plainly. My brother heard nothing at all, because he had never once in his life listened for the voice inside a tool. He only bore down harder, so the blade answered him itself. It flared and threw a killing cold across the whole workshop, and the ice took the tools and the wheel and both of Damon's arms to the elbow, and locked him there where he stood. Caroline watched him thrash against the ice, and told him the thing he would never be able to understand, that the sword was alive, that it was furious, that I had kept it well for years because I listened to what it wanted, and he had done nothing but force his way through it. "I will never come to this shop again," she said, "and I will not pay you a single copper for the damage." Then she pulled her sword free of the ice and left. Serena arrived not long after, to empty shelves and a frozen workshop, and a man with his arms sealed in ice. The two of them turned on each other, she demanding to know how he could fail to recognize the most important blade in the kingdom, he refusing to hear one word of blame. Neither of them had the first idea what I had actually been to that place. They were still shouting when the messenger came. He was from the Hartwell Company, and he was pale, and he had one thing to say. The royal family had canceled every contract, all of them at once, that same day. I heard they went white. I heard the fight went out of the room like heat out of a cracked window. They had taken the house, the shop, the bride, the whole tidy little kingdom of things that were supposed to be mine. And inside a single afternoon, a hero had powdered their stock, frozen their workshop, and the crown had cut them loose. And they still could not say the name of the reason why. None of it had reached all the way into them yet. It was only the first frost on the glass, but it had started, and it was not going to stop. The morning after I built her a house out of a fallen tree, Piper walked beside me on the road and asked in a small voice if she could stay. She said it fast, like a thing she had practiced. No family left, no home to go back to, nowhere that was hers. She kept her eyes on the dirt while she said it, ears flat, that broom of a tail held stiff, bracing for me to say no. "All right," I told her. "You can come with me." Her head came up so quick I thought she'd hurt her neck. "Yes, Adrian," she said, and the tail went from stiff to a blur. That was the whole negotiation. I had left the capital owing nothing to anyone, and somewhere on the road that had quietly become the best thing about it, that I could pick up a person the way I picked up work, because I wanted to, not because a ledger said so. We set off to find a village. I needed a carriage, some supplies, and, honestly, a direction, since I had thrown myself into the unknown on purpose, and the unknown had not left a map. Piper turned her head one way, then another, ears swiveling like little dishes. "This way," she said. "I've got good ears, you see. There's people, old ones, I think." She was already walking before I answered. The village felt wrong before we reached it. Piper slowed, ears twitching, and said the sound was thin, too few voices, and all of them old. She was right. The place was half drowned. A river had jumped its banks and come down through the houses, and the houses had not survived it. Roofs sat crooked in brown water. Walls had slid off their frames. and the people picking through the wreckage were all gray-haired, all bent, moving slow the way you move when you have already given up and are only going through the shapes of trying. Piper crouched by one of them and talked low and gentle, then brought over the man they called Chief. He was ancient, stooped, and he introduced himself the way a man does when he expects it to be the last useful thing he says. "I'm the chief of this village," he said. "Arthur, at your service." The river had come over in the night, he told me. No embankment, never had been one, and this time, the water took everything. The young had gone away years back. What was left was elders and mud. He did not ask me for anything. He had stopped expecting help to be a thing that arrived. I looked at a collapsed house with its beam snapped clean in two. I am good at fixing things. It is the one thing I have never once been confused about. "Give me a little room," I said, and rolled up my sleeves. I put my hand on the broken house and used full restoration. There is no drama to how it looks from the outside, which is the part people never believe. The beam that was snapped in two was simply not snapped anymore. The wall that had slid off its frame was back on its frame. Water ran out of the doorway and the boards behind it were dry, whole, standing the way the builder first meant them to stand. Then I pulled ordinary ore up out of the ground, common stuff, nothing rare, and used transmutation to fuse it into the timber so the next flood would find harder houses to argue with. Then I did it again and again, down the row. Behind me, an old woman made a sound I will not forget, half a laugh and half something with no name, her hands pressed over her mouth. Arthur just stood in the mud and stared, turning his head from a mended house to me and back, as if one of us had to be a trick. Piper was not quiet about any of it. "That one too, Adrian, and that one," she called, pointing, delighted, following me down the lane like a foreman who had never once done this before and was thrilled about all of it. House after house came back. The village stopped looking like a grave and started looking like a place where people lived. But the river was still up there above them, and a fixed house is no good if the water only comes again. I went up to the river where it had jumped. Super transmutation is the same trick as the small one, only it does not care about size. I set my palm to the ground and raised a levee straight up out of the earth, a long, clean wall of packed stone that put the water back where it belonged. The river hit it, thought about it, and gave up. That handled the flood. It did not handle the next one, and there is always a next one. So I called Mjolnir to me and told it to grow. My grandfather's hammer takes any shape and size you ask of it, and asks for nothing back. No magic spent, no cost, just a word. It swelled in my grip until it was bigger than I am. I drove a wide hollow into the forest floor beside the river, a basin the size of a small lake, and then I lined up a craftsman's technique my grandfather drilled into me, shockwave, and cut a channel from the river's edge to the hollow with one straight strike. The overflow rolled off the river and filled the basin instead of the village, a reservoir, water for the dry months, and one less flood for the wet ones. Arthur had followed me the whole way, and now he grabbed my arm. That, he insisted, was Earth Dragon Rush, high earth magic, heroes magic. No craftsman does that. No, I said, it's just a craftsman's technique. My grandfather taught me. He kept shaking his head, so I added, I'm not really interested in magic, which did not help him at all. That shockwave, that was amazing, Adrian, Piper said, spinning to look at the new lake. Arthur only pressed both hands to his face and muttered that the man in front of him was extraordinary in every possible direction. I let them think whatever they liked. The water was where it should be. That was the job. Arthur wanted to give me a reward. I told him I did not need one, which was true and also seemed to distress him. So I asked instead if the village kept any unusual weapons or tools I might study. I had left the capital to make my own masterpiece someday, a divine artifact from nothing, and I collect strange things the way other men collect debts. He went very still. Then he led us out to a shrine at the forest's edge, where a stair went down into the ground, and on the way, he told us what waited at the bottom. Long ago, he said, the sword god gave a hero a demon sword to kill an evil god. The blade did its work, but it carried a curse, and the curse drove the man who held it out of his mind. And terrible things came after that he would not describe, and I did not need him to. When the hero finally died, a witch goddess sealed the sword down here with a spell everyone agreed was absolutely unbreakable, and the village had guarded the stairs ever since. The air got heavier the lower we went. Piper's ears pinned back, and Arthur's breath went short. The thing down there drank at the life of anything near it, and the two of them felt it like a hand pressing on the chest. I did not feel it at all. At the bottom, on a black stone altar, lay the sword, rusted through, pitted, half-eaten by its own age, wrapped in a seal that glowed sick and faint. Piper set her feet like she meant to stand between me and it, even shaking. "Why?" she got out. "Would a god give anyone something like this?" I did not have a good answer. I was already listening to something else. Under the aura, under the rust, the sword was crying. Not a sound the others could hear. I have always been able to hear tools. It is not a poem, it is a fact. The way you can hear a floorboard tell you it is about to give. And this one was not roaring or hungry the way a cursed thing is supposed to be. It was begging. A voice worn thin as the blade itself, asking to be let go, asking someone, anyone, to end how long it had been like this. "Please," it said. "Please, I have been here so long. Just release me." Arthur was telling me the seal could not be broken. I put my hand out over it anyway. I linked Mjolnir to myself, drew the power up through it, and used the first level of all destruction, disassembly. The unbreakable seal came apart like a knot you finally find the right thread of. It did not shatter. It simply stopped holding. I lifted the rusted blade off the altar. The moment it was in my hand, the curse turned on me and tried to climb into my head, to do to me what it had done to that long-dead hero, and it found nothing to grip. I do not fully understand why the death of it slides off me, only that it does, and that whatever I am was made in part so that things like this cannot win. And under my fingers, I felt the truth of it. The curse was not the sword. The curse had been put into the sword on purpose by the god who forged it, laid in to make the wielder go berserk, cold and deliberate, a cruelty built to a plan. The blade never asked for any of it. It had only carried it alone in the dark for longer than the village upstairs had existed. "You've waited long enough," I told it. "Hold on, I'll make you whole." I started with full repair, and the rust went first. Ages of it lifted off the steel like breath off glass, and the pits filled, and the edge came back true. But repair only gives you back what a thing was, and what this thing had been was a weapon built to break the mind of whoever loved it. I did not want it back. I wanted it free, so I reached deeper into the core of the metal where the curse was welded to its bones, and I used super refinement. This is the part I will never be able to explain to anyone who was not born to it. Refinement does not scrape the curse off. It reworks the blade from the center out, so the same death aura that had strangled this room turned, not gone, turned into something clean. The sick glow guttered and then caught, and where it had been a color like spoiled meat, it became a deep radiance, black and silver at once, the color of a clear night, with no moon and every star out. The light of it filled the whole chamber. Piper had her arm up over her eyes. Arthur had gone down to his knees without seeming to notice he had. The blade in my hands was beautiful now, dark, but a holy dark, the aura pouring off it warm instead of cold. And out of the steel a spirit rose, a woman, graceful, robed in an Eastern style I had never seen worn, standing in the air over the altar like she had been waiting all this time to be able to stand at all. She looked at me, not with fear, with the face of someone who had been drowning and had just been set down on dry ground. "Thank you," she said, and her voice shook. "Thank you, craftsman. You made me. Thank you." Arthur was staring up at her from his knees, and what came out of him was not gratitude, but disbelief. No human, he said, had ever made a holy sword. Never in all of history. Even the last Worldsmith, even Gideon, my own grandfather, had tried and failed. I heard it. I understood, somewhere at the back of my head, that I had just done a thing that was supposed to be impossible. It did not move me much. I only asked her the one question that mattered. "Are you still hurting?" She shook her head, and she was smiling. "No," she said. "It feels very good." That was the whole of the achievement, as far as I was concerned. She was not hurting anymore. There was a catch, though, and it showed up right away. Piper could hear the spirit. She could not see her. Neither could Arthur. They stood there hearing a woman's voice out of an empty patch of air, and I realized that this was how holy swords had always been. The spirit shows herself only to the one hero chosen to wield the blade, and stays invisible to everyone else. There are 6 of them in the world. I knew that much from the old job. 1 to each continent, and every one of them can be lifted by exactly one person and turns to dead weight or worse in any other hand. I had spent years maintaining one of them for a client too strong for the sword to refuse. I have never liked that. A tool that only one person can use is barely a tool at all. It is a little closer to a curse than anyone wants to admit. which is to say, it is barely better than the thing this sword used to be. Tools have hearts, and a heart should not be locked to one owner. The spirit heard me thinking it, more or less, and asked me for two things: a name and my maker's mark engraved on her blade. In the Far East, she said, that is the highest honor you can give a made thing. So I gave them both. I looked at that black and silver edge, at a dark like a sky full of stars, and the name was easy. Night Sky, I said. Then I shrank Mjolnir back to a fine point and set my Worldsmith mark into the steel with a single light tap. Not my name, the mark of the line, the one my grandfather carried and his before him. The blade answered. I felt the warm power go out of my right hand into it, and the sword changed. Not repaired, evolved, the way the old stories say monsters evolve, which no weapon has ever done. The western shape narrowed and curved into an eastern one, a katana, glowing bright enough to fill the room a second time. And when the light settled, Piper gasped. I can see her, she said, both hands over her mouth. Adrian, I can see her. She's beautiful. The spirit was visible to all of them now. Luna, she told me her name felt like, once she had one. She said my mark and my name had pushed her past an ordinary holy sword into something with no word for it yet, that my warm right hand had poured itself into her, and she had become more than she was. I handed the katana to Piper to test it. She is no hero. By every rule that had ever governed these blades, she should not have been able to lift it. She drew it clean, turned it in her hands like she had trained for years, and stared at her own arms in astonishment. Instant mastery. Anyone who held Night Sky simply knew how to use her. She laughed, delighted. A beast folk girl with a legend in her grip and no chosen bloodline anywhere in her. Even someone like me can use it, she breathed. And she was not sad when she said it. She was amazed. I had done what I set out to do. Made a holy sword that would serve anyone who needed it, not just the lucky few. That was the ideal. And there it was, ringing quietly in Piper's hands. But it is not the part I carried out of that shrine. What I carried out was smaller, and it was this. Luna would never lie alone in the dark and the damp again, unheard, begging in a voice no one came for. Someone had finally heard her. She had a name now, and people who could see her face, and a road out of that room. I know what it is to be the useful thing in the corner that no one quite looks at. I would not leave anyone down there in it, not even a sword. We climbed the stairs back up into the night, the four of us now, and behind me, the first holy sword ever made by human hands came with us into open air. I was sitting on the bench of a borrowed wagon, letting the horse pick its own pace, when, a whole kingdom away, a woman I had never proposed to decided she was going to marry me. I didn't know it yet. I wouldn't know it for a while, but I'll tell it the way I learned it later, because it changed everything that came after. Caroline, the ice hero, was packing a trunk when her sword spirit went rigid on her shoulder. Frost rides there most days, a small white cat only Caroline can see. She had just felt something no living person could feel. A new holy sword had been born into the world. That's not possible, Caroline said. Frost told her it was very possible, and that it had happened moments ago. Every holy sword in the world, all 6 of them, had been forged by gods in the higher realm and sent down. Not one had ever been made by mortal hands. Now a 7th had woken up somewhere to the east, and the 6 old ones had all felt it open its eyes. Caroline went quiet. Then she said one name, and Frost, I'm told, made a sound cats aren't supposed to make. Because of course, who else in the whole world would it be? If people learn a man can make these, Frost warned, they'll go to war to own him. Caroline was already moving. She wasn't thinking about maintenance anymore, about the years she'd handed her blade across a counter to a quiet craftsman who never once looked at her like she was a hero. She was thinking that every king and every church would want him, and that some of them wouldn't ask nicely. So she made a decision that had nothing to do with swords. She would reach him first, and she would propose. Frost thought that was sensible enough. Better an old admirer at his side than some newcomer scrambling onto the bandwagon. The spirit told her where to look, a border village called Dead End, pressed right up against the Redmark Empire. Then Frost added the part that made Caroline's jaw go tight. The Empire kept a hero of its own on that border, the lightning hero, a woman. Caroline was out the door before the sentence finished. She wasn't the only one listening. A rat had been sitting in the corner of that bedchamber the whole time. Not a rat, a familiar, a borrowed pair of eyes belonging to Princess Eleanor. Eleanor had watched a discarded craftsman's whole stock get thrown out of a capital shop weeks earlier, and she had already canceled a kingdom's worth of trade over it. Now she had overheard the rest. She called for her knights, ordered a carriage readied, and announced that she would ride for Dead End Village. name the man a hero of the realm, and marry him before anyone else thought to. 3 people then were already coming for me. I was worth a war, and I was busy watching my friend lose an argument with a sword. The wagon had been a parting gift from Arthur. That, and enough food to make Piper's ears twitch every time she peeked under the tarp. We were bound for the Redmark Empire on no reason grander than a rumor of a fairy forest I wanted to see. A slow trip, that was the whole plan. Luna liked it out here. The spirit of Night Sky walked beside the wagon when she felt like being seen. A graceful woman in a dark robe who 3 nights ago had been a rusted blade begging in the black. "The air is wonderful," she said, more than once, like she was still learning she was allowed to want things. Then Piper's ears snapped straight up. She pointed at the sky, a green dragon, scaled and heavy, dropping toward us with its mouth open. She was already off the bench. "You've done enough carrying," she told me. "Let me." I only asked her to leave the scales mostly whole. They make good armor plate. She drew Night Sky and went to meet it. She won. 2 strikes, and the dragon came down in the grass and did not get up. For a woman who was no hero, holding a blade any hero would kill for, it should have been the proudest moment of her life. Luna clicked her tongue instead. "Less than 1 part in 100, the spirit said. "That's all you drew out of me. It isn't enough." Piper's tail dropped flat against her legs. She looked at the sword in her hands like she had let it down. She didn't get the chance to answer. The sky went white. Something dropped out of it and struck the ground where we had just been standing, and the world became noise and dirt. I had Piper by the collar and off her feet before the crater finished opening, a smoking pit the size of a house. A woman stood at the bottom of it, tanned, wild, orange hair, yanked up into a topknot, a black patch over her right eye, grinning like she'd been handed a birthday present. A whip hung coiled in one hand, crackling and shifting on its own. Thunderthorn, the lightning holy sword, and she was the hero it had chosen. "Teacher!" she shouted, delighted. "I finally found you." Piper put herself between us and demanded to know who this was. Raina looked her over and lost interest fast. She said she was going to test whether this one deserved to stand beside her teacher, her future husband. Both apparently settled facts in her head, and then she moved. The whip came alive. It snapped past Piper's guard, wrapped her leg, and flung her into the air like a stone from a sling. Piper swung Night Sky down at the coil and the blade skated off it. She couldn't even cut the thing. Then Raina raised her arm, brought a bolt down out of a clear sky, and a mountain on the horizon stopped being a mountain. I solidified the air beneath Piper into a floor she couldn't see and set her down easy, then hardened a wall of it between her and whatever came next. Raina laughed and called her weak, said a man like me belonged beside a strong woman, and threw everything she had. 4 bolts at once, 4 mountains flattened in a row, the shockwave rolling the grass in long silver waves. I stacked the air thicker and let it break the blast apart before it reached us. She loved that. I watched her decide I was worth her very best, and her very best was a monster. She hauled the whip back over her head, and the whole storm folded down into it and took a shape. A dragon of raw lightning, wide enough to blacken the sky, thunderheads pouring into its spine. Lightning Heaven Dragon, she called it. It would have scorched the ground flat for miles. I took the restraint off Mjolnir. I don't do that often. The hammer my grandfather left me can take almost anything apart down to nothing, and at its highest level, I keep it chained on purpose, because very few things in the world ever need it. Her dragon needed it. I threw. The hammer passed through the dragon, and the dragon simply stopped existing. No thunder, no fire raining down, no wreckage. The clouds it had fed on went with it. The sky over 4 ruined mountains turned an ordinary noon blue, and the only sound left was the wind. Mjolnir curved around in a long, lazy arc and came back to my hand as if it had never left. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, Raina tackled me. She hung off my arm, laughing and half crying at once, announcing that if she ever beat me, I would have to marry her on the spot. I told her, kindly, not to take the bet seriously. It was a joke, and I meant it as one. But I also told her the truth, that she had grown. The girl I'd once known could never have made that dragon. She heard the second part and glowed. Piper picked herself up out of the flattened grass. She looked at Night Sky, then at the woman who had tossed her around like wet laundry, and something in her face set into a decision. She said she was ashamed, that she carried a blade forged by the strongest person she'd ever met, and couldn't do it justice. For once, Luna's voice went soft, and she said she was frustrated too, and that they would fix it together, the two of them, until no one could throw either of them anywhere again. With the crater cooling behind us, Piper finally asked the question she'd been chewing on. What exactly was I to this woman? Raina slung an arm across my shoulders and announced we were engaged. We're not, I said. I made her a tool years ago, that's all. Then I told them the rest, because Piper deserved to understand it, and Raina had stopped hiding it long ago. The patch over her right eye was not for show. When she was a child, a cruel man had forced a curse into that eye, a thing the old church called the death god's evil eye. Whatever it looked upon, it killed, not with a blade. It simply drew the life out of any living thing she turned her gaze on, and she'd had no say in it and no way to be free of it. For years, the Empire kept her shut away, frightened of her and unable to punish her either, because the lightning holy sword had chosen her, and no one argues with the holy sword. Then they sent for me. Back then, I was not the man I am now. I couldn't break the curse. All I could manage was a sealing tool to hold the eye closed and keep it from going wild, and I came back now and again to tend it as it wore thin. That was the whole of what passed between us. Somewhere in those visits, she'd decided I had hung the moon. Luna had gone still through all of it. When I finished, her voice was very quiet. I was a cursed thing once too. I can't hear this and call it someone else's trouble. She reminded me gently what I'd done in a dark shrine 3 nights before, that I hadn't sealed her curse. I had remade her from the core out. Why not the eye? I turned to Raina. If you'll let me, I told her, I'd like to take it off you for good, not seal it. End it. She didn't hesitate for even a breath. She said she trusted me with her life, that if it was my hands doing the work, the risk didn't matter to her at all. She lifted the patch away. I won't describe what sat beneath it. I raised Mjolnir, found the magic circle the curse was written on, and broke it with one light tap. Then, before the thing could knit itself whole again the way it always had, I rebuilt it. Not into a wound, into something new. When I lowered the hammer, the death curse was gone, and in its place sat a golden thing that had never existed in the world before. The Eye of the Time King, a divine artifact. I had no idea yet what it could do, and I found I didn't much care, so long as she got to keep it and smile. Open it, I told her. She was afraid. Of course she was. She had spent her whole life learning that opening that eye killed whatever stood in front of it, and what stood in front of it now was me. She opened it anyway, slowly. A golden eye where a cursed one had always been, and I was still there, alive. Nothing died. She looked at me with both eyes for the first time since she was a girl, and the loud, wild, mountain-breaking lightning hero folded up and began to cry. She caught my hands and thanked me over and over in a small voice that had nothing to do with the one that had challenged me to a duel an hour before. I let her. Some things you don't undersell. Behind me, Piper scrubbed at her own face and pretended she hadn't. Luna only watched with the quiet look of someone who knows exactly what it costs to be remade and exactly what it's worth. 3 people were racing across the kingdom to claim me, and I still didn't know a thing about it. But there was one more of us on the road that night than there had been that morning, and she could finally watch the sun go down without it dying in front of her. I wasn't there for any of this. I only heard how it went later, put together from people who happened to be in the building that day, and I'll tell it the way it reached me. While I was a kingdom away, pulling a death curse out of a girl's eye, the people who threw me out were finding out what I had been worth. It started with Serena alone at her father's old desk, and the room too big and too empty around her. The way it was described to me, she hadn't slept properly in weeks. The royal family had quietly stopped buying the day the princess canceled her orders. The great houses followed, the way great houses always do, one after another, none of them saying why out loud. Serena told herself it was a slow season. She told herself it would turn, but she was down to a single major client, and she knew, in the part of her that couldn't lie at that hour of the day, that if she lost that one, she'd be letting half her people go. She kept coming back to a thing I'd said to her once, and she'd laughed off, that the company ran on my weapons. She'd thought I was being dramatic, a craftsman puffing himself up. Sitting there in the cold light, she was starting to wonder. Then her clerk came in, pale, and told her the guild had sent someone. Not a letter, someone. The someone was Henrietta. If you don't know the name, you would have then. She ran Heaven's Bestowed Ore, the S-rank guild the crown itself leaned on for its steel. Young, long silver hair, a face people describe the way you describe weather. And she carried the thing that made merchants sweat in their sleep, the appraisal eye, an S-class gift that was said to read the hidden truth of any object. And, if you believed the rumors, a little of the future besides. She didn't come alone. Behind her stood a man in a silver mask and a black mantle, a summoner the guild called Silver, and he never said a word the whole time. Henrietta didn't sit. She told Serena, flatly, that her guild intended to sue the Hartwell Trading Company for fraud. Serena started to protest. Henrietta lifted one hand, and Silver stepped forward and snapped his fingers. A magic circle opened in the middle of the office floor, and out of it came a crate of swords and a battered wooden practice dummy. Then he took up 2 blades. One was old, a plain, unglamorous thing with a maker's mark stamped near the guard. The other was newer, brighter, prettier. He cut the dummy with the old one first. It went through the wood like the wood wasn't there. Then he swung the new one, the A-rank blade Serena's company had delivered by the 50, and it bit an inch deep and stuck fast, and the edge folded. A real A-rank sword does not do that, Henrietta said. She let the ruined blade hang there in the dummy for everyone to look at. Serena said something about a bad batch. Henrietta's eyes changed then. The people who saw it said the color of them shifted, like light moving under ice, and she looked at the whole crate at once. She told the room what she saw. Every blade in it was scrap iron, rust and filings and cheap steel, dressed up in an illusion to wear the shape of a masterwork. 50 counterfeit A-rank swords, sold to the one guild in the kingdom that could not be fooled about steel. Serena's poise came apart in stages. She said she hadn't known. She said the craftsman had done it, that Damon had brought her the swords finished and certified, that the fault was his. Henrietta wasn't moved. "You are the merchant," she said. "The quality check is yours. You put your seal on the crate." She gathered her mantle. "We know whose hands the fakes came from. We also know whose hands sold them." Serena went down then, actually down, around the guildmaster's legs, begging, the way I was told she used to find contemptible in other people. She swore she'd make it right. She asked for time. Henrietta looked at her for a moment, the way you look at a building that's already decided to fall. "Your father sold reliable goods," she said. "The quality died the season he did. Everyone in the trade knows it. There was exactly one thing that ever made this company worth crossing our door for, and it was the weapons your craftsman made." She paused at the door. "He isn't your craftsman anymore, so there is nothing here we need." And she left. Silver's circle swallowed the crate and the dummy, and the office was empty and too big again, and Serena was on the floor of it. They say she stayed down a long time, and then it landed on her all at once. Not the lawsuit, not the money, but the plain arithmetic of it. Every door had closed the week I walked out. The crown, the houses, the guild. Not one of them had left because of Damon or a bad season. They'd left because the maker was gone. I hadn't been puffing myself up. I'd been telling her the flattest truth in the world, and she had laughed and married my brother. And only now, on the floor, did she understand that she'd thrown away the one thing that had ever held her walls up. She screamed, no words in it, just the sound a person makes when the last excuse is gone. While that was happening upstairs, Damon was in my forge, and he was pleased with himself. You have to understand what the room was. It was mine, my furnace, my anvils, my grandfather's mark still cut into the beam over the door. It had been frozen solid a while back, when Caroline came through in her fury, and the cold had cracked every genuine blade I'd left in the racks. Everything real in that shop was gone, so the furnace sat dead, and Damon had no way to make a single honest sword, and it hadn't slowed him down at all. He had a stamp, a small dark thing, and he pressed it to the flat of a rusted, pitted blade, and the rust vanished under a skin of illusion, and the wretched thing gleamed like a masterwork. He'd been marveling at it for days, the way I heard it. One press, and any piece of junk in the kingdom wore the face of A-rank steel. He hadn't found it. It had been given to him. Back when the shop was still frozen, when he was standing in the wreck of it with nothing to sell, a man he didn't know had come to him, polite and smiling, and pressed the stamp into his hand. The man had called it a small cursed thing that changed only the look of a blade, never the substance, and said it would make him easy money, and waved off any thanks, and told him only to use it well. And then the man was gone, and Damon, who had never once in his life turned down an easy road, had taken it and asked no questions. Serena came down into the forge still gray from what had happened above. She saw the stamp in his hand before he could hide it. She'd just watched 50 of these same fakes get read down to scrap by the sharpest eye in the kingdom. And here was the whole trick, sitting in her husband's palm. She took it from him. He grabbed for it and missed. He tried, when she asked him straight, to talk his way sideways. That a sword that sold was a good sword, that quality was a luxury, that only fools left money on the table over pride. She told him what his cleverness had bought. A lawsuit from heaven's bestowed ore. The end of the company. Every door in the capital already shut. Then she did the one thing that ends men like my brother. She pointed at the cold furnace and told him to make one. Just one. A real A-rank sword right now, with his own two hands, to prove the craftsman she'd married existed at all. He couldn't. He stood in a forge he owned, in front of an anvil he'd inherited, and he could not so much as begin. And with the lie stripped off him, he finally said the true thing, the thing he'd been running from since we were boys. He'd never made any of it. Every fine blade the company ever sold under his name had come out of the stockpile I left behind. My leftover work, my overflow, sold off quietly as his. And that stockpile was ash and cracked steel on the floor of a frozen room. He had nothing real. He had never had anything real. I was told Serena went very quiet then, and then she said it plainly, without heat, which is the way that cuts deepest, that he was no craftsman, that he was a fool who'd mistaken a shortcut for a skill, that his brother had never talked the way he talked, had just made good things for the people who'd use them, and that his brother was, in every way that had ever mattered, the better man. That was the word that broke him, better. He'd spent his whole life inside that comparison, and he came apart at it, screaming that he was sick to death of hearing that Adrian was better, that he'd heard it from our father, and heard it from the trade, and now heard it from his own wife. And why did it never, ever stop? She was already done. She told him she'd expect nothing of him as a craftsman again, and she turned to go. He caught her hand. She slapped him hard once and told him not to touch her work again. Even then, he reached for a shortcut. He said, half wild, that he could get something greater from that man, a cursed thing stronger than a stamp, one that wouldn't just paint a blade, but truly raise it, turn junk into a divine tool in a single stroke. She didn't even argue it. She called it impossible and left it lying there, but he believed it. That was the part that stayed with the people who told me this, because Damon, alone of everyone in that shop, knew such a power was real. He'd grown up next to it. He'd sold its leavings for years. He knew in his gut that there was one man in the world who could turn a nothing thing into a wonder, and he hated that man with everything he had left. Serena climbed the stairs without looking back. She had workshops to visit and apologies to carry, deliveries that would never come, and she meant to do it alone. Whatever she had felt for my brother, it had gone out like the furnace, and it wasn't coming back. So no one was watching Damon when the change started. No one but the man in the doorway. He sat where she'd left him, on the floor of my forge, beating the cursed stamp against the flagstones like a child hammering a toy, and something began to come off him. A thread of black mist, thin at first, curling up from his shoulders and his hands where they gripped the stamp. It had no smell and made no sound. It just rose off his despair, the way steam rises off water, and thickened and reached. If you'd seen the things I would come to see, a dragon god's rigged prison, a cursed blade in a dark shrine, a lion with a jewel of hate set into its skull, you'd have known that mist. The same black, the same patient, hungry quality to the way it moved. It was on Damon now, seeping into him through every crack his own envy had opened, and it was settling in like it had found a house it meant to keep. And in the dark of the corridor, just past the doorway, the man who had given him the stamp stood and watched it happen. The same polite smile. He'd waved off thanks, given the gift for free, asked for nothing, and this was the price. This was what he'd come to collect, not coin. This, my brother on the floor of my forge, hollowed out and full of hate, breathing out a curse he couldn't feel. The man watched Damon a moment longer, satisfied, the way a craftsman looks at a piece that's finally coming along. Then the dusk took him and he was gone, and nobody in that whole crumbling company had seen him at all. I didn't know any of it yet, not the lawsuit, not the 50 fakes, not my brother weeping in the room where I'd learned my trade, and least of all, the thin black thread that had begun to wind through him while a stranger smiled in the dark. I was a kingdom away, on a night road with the people who'd chosen to stay, thinking the worst of it was behind me. It wasn't. The lie had only cracked. It hadn't fallen yet, and the man in the doorway had all the time in the world. Piper went stiff in the middle of a sentence, one hand still half lifted, frozen like a painting of herself. Across the carriage, Raina had pushed her eye patch up onto her brow. Under it, her right eye was open, gold now, bright as a struck coin. The curse I'd once only managed to seal was gone. In its place sat the thing I had rebuilt it into, the divine artifact she'd started calling the Eye of the Time King. "Let her go," I said. She did. Piper dragged in a breath and grabbed her own arm as if to check it was still hers. "My whole body just stopped," she said, ears flat with the shock of it. I explained what I understood of it. The eye could halt time for whatever it looked at. With training, Raina might learn to bend time in other ways too. Slow it, hold it, who knew how far? Piper stared at me like I'd said the sky was a machine I could open. Then Raina remembered our bet. She reminded me of it at full volume, grinning, leaning in, that if she won our little wager, I became her man. And to make the point, she turned that gold eye on me like a loaded crossbow. Nothing happened. I felt the pull of it wash over me and simply slide off. Reyna blinked, aimed again, harder. Still nothing. She started sputtering that this was a cheat, that her brand new divine power had a stupid, unfair loophole in it. It does, I admitted. A divine artifact can't be used against the person who finished making it. I made your eye, so it can't touch me. That was the moment I turned the rule over properly for the first time. A maker is safe from his own work. A quiet thing to know. It would matter more than I guessed. The capital came up out of the valley, and over it hung a dome of pale light. I asked the others if they saw it. They didn't. To Piper and Reyna, the sky over Carter was just sky, but I could see it clear as glass. A shell of light bent across the whole city. Luna's voice touched the back of my mind, calm and pleased. My creator, she said, that is the barrier that guards the town. Of course, the ordinary folk cannot see it. And she told me, plainly, that if I could see it now, it only meant my craft had climbed high enough that the world's hidden defenses had become things I could read. So I read it, and near the eastern curve of the dome, I found a crack, a thin fault running through the light, the kind of flaw I'd have caught in a blade before I'd finished the first heat. I couldn't leave it. A whole city sat under that shell. The circle rose in front of me the way it had for Reyna's eye, a wheel of glowing script hanging in the air, the diagram of the thing itself. I broke it and set it back together the way I'd mend any cracked part, quick, without ceremony. The dome flared, then rolled over with color, every shade at once, before it settled clean and whole. Reyna whooped that we had to tell the Empress this instant. I told her it was fine, really, no need. It was just a crack. I'd only fixed what was broken. She was not having that. They took us to the very top of the castle, and there I met the woman who ruled the whole Redmark Empire. Empress Artemis was old and gray and small under her blankets, and she was dying. Reyna had told us on the stairs, a lung sickness nothing could touch. Not the Empire's doctors, who had every clever machine in the world short of the dwarves' own. Not even the saintess the church had sent. They had all given up. Piper had asked, wide-eyed, whether the ruler of an entire empire could really be a woman. Reyna said this one had saved the capital herself, once at the head of her own army. You took the throne here by being the strongest, man or woman, and Artemis had been the strongest. She didn't look it now. She looked like a candle at its last inch, but she knew me. She lifted her head off the pillow and thanked me for lifting the curse from Reyna's eye twice over, and said, between the coughs, that she was glad she got to thank me properly before she went. Then she said the thing I couldn't let pass. She said her body was broken and the doctors could do nothing. Broken. That was a word I understood better than any doctor alive. Let me look at your broken body, I said. I think I can repair it. She studied me a long moment. Then, because I was the man who had saved Reyna, she trusted me, and she agreed. The circle rose over her the way it had over the barrier and the eye, but bigger, stranger. The whole map of a living person laid out in light, and I could see it. I could see exactly where she was wrong inside. I took up Mjolnir, my grandfather's divine hammer, and I struck only the broken pieces, the sickness and the worn-out years both, and set them back the way they were meant to be. Rainbow light poured up off her and filled the room. When the light faded, the old woman was gone. In her place sat a young one, barely out of her teens, upright, breathing easy, staring at her own two hands. I'd only meant to mend the sickness, but mending a thing all the way means putting it back to when it wasn't broken at all, and her body had taken that further than I ever intended. I handed her the little mirror I keep for checking a finish, and she looked, and she made a sound I don't think an empress is supposed to make. Her guards came crashing in at the noise, took one look at the girl on the imperial bed, and started shouting for the empress, until she told them, half laughing, half crying, that she was the empress. Then she wept in earnest. She bowed to me from the bed, deep as her spine would bend, and called me her lifesaver, and swore she would repay me with anything I named. I don't need money, I told her. Your smile is more than enough. The second it left my mouth, I wanted to climb into the forge and pull the door shut. Where I get lines like that, I will never know. She went scarlet to the ears. Behind me, Piper and Reyna had put their heads together and were whispering. I caught just enough to understand that a grateful young, beautiful empress had, in their accounting, just been entered onto some list of rivals, and that the two of them had agreed to hold a united front against her for the time being. I decided I had not heard that. The next morning, a colonel burst into the audience chamber shouting that the city barrier device was destroyed. He was a bearded, hard-faced man in a military coat, and his name was Aiken. On his heels came worse news. A swarm of demon insects, he said, was already coming for the walls. I asked Raina what those were. She'd gone tense. Demon insects, she told me, were giant things out of the deep forest, shells harder than divine iron, forcing them to match an ancient dragon or beat one. Even she didn't like fighting them. Aiken pressed hard for the city to be emptied and his own unit sent out. When I said I could simply fix the barrier device, he sneered at me, some stranger off the road, thinking he could touch Imperial machinery. But Artemis, young and clear-voiced now, cut across him and vouched for me. A genius blacksmith, she called me. She'd stake her word on it. Then a messenger ran in, breathless, and reported that the swarm had been wiped out. All of it. The moment the insects touched the barrier, they were simply gone. The colonel's face fell apart, and in the middle of falling apart, he snapped out that he was the one who had broken the device, and heard himself say it a half-second too late. So I told him what he hadn't understood. I'd mended the barrier the evening we arrived when I saw the flaw in it. I hadn't meant to change what it did, but in fixing it, I'd built it stronger than it was. And now, it didn't just push monsters back, it ended them where they touched. The air beside me shivered, and Luna stepped out of the sword into the shape of a woman, dark-robed, serene, wreathed in that soft night-colored glow. She looked the colonel up and down, and remarked that a scowl like his rather suited a traitor. Then she told the room evenly what her master had done to the barrier, and that no device was holding it up anymore at all. That broke him the rest of the way. "You said you broke the barrier device, didn't you?" I said. It wasn't really a question. He didn't answer it. He screamed instead, glory to his master, a name I'd never heard, something he flung up at the ceiling like a prayer. And then, with nothing left to lose, he lunged for the barrier device and forced it to overload, meaning to blow the whole chamber and every one of us with it. The core of the thing lit white and swelled to burst. I stepped in front of it and erased it. That's the plainest way to say what all destruction does. It doesn't smother a blast or throw it clear. It unmakes it, takes the whole detonation out of the world before it can happen. The white light simply stopped existing. The room stayed standing. Nobody was hurt, not even the man who'd tried it. The guards took him down to the cells for questioning rather than the block. Artemis watched them drag him out, and I saw color come up in her face and heard her murmur, almost to herself, that now that matter could finally go ahead. I turned the strange word he'd screamed over in my head, and I wondered what matter she meant. I didn't get either answer that day. 10 days later, I was standing on a mountain that belonged to me. The matter, it turned out, was this. For saving the capital 3 times over, the Empress had made me a lord, handed me a whole northern territory, a stretch of the White Dragon Mountains called Lordale, and a noble name to go with it, Adrian Lordale, a commoner raised up on purpose, a living proof that her empire would lift a man for what he could do and not for who his grandfather was. Luna slid out of the sword, took one look at the endless gray peaks, and grumbled that this was a wretched sort of gift, all rock and no comfort. I didn't mind it. Piper asked why I looked so pleased at a pile of mountains, and I pointed her to the dark mouths of old abandoned mines scattered up the slopes. Nobody working them, which meant free ore, as much as I could haul, for every blade and every plate of armor I'd ever want to make. For a craftsman, it wasn't a wasteland, it was a full pantry. So we started walking down toward the river to see what else I'd been handed. A girl screamed somewhere ahead. Piper had the direction before I did, ears up, then gone, sprinting through the trees with me behind her. We came out on the riverbank onto a monster, a walking plant near 3 men tall, something like a great pitcher plant grown legs, lashing its vines at a little girl backed up against the water. Piper drew Night Sky and went in. She cut vines, good clean strokes, but the thing had more vines than she had swings, and it wrapped her, coil over coil, until she could barely move. She twisted just far enough to throw the girl clear, and I caught the child out of the air. Then I called the sword home. Night Sky, to me, it vanished out of Piper's tangled grip and was in my hand before she finished falling, and the vines closed on nothing. I swung once. A black crescent opened in the air where the blade passed, a tear in the world, and everything on the wrong side of it went in. The monster, the trees behind it, a whole rushing column of river water, all of it hauled through in one roar of wind. Then the tear sealed. Where the creature had stood there was bare scoured ground and nothing else. That's the sword's nature, a darkness that swallows whatever it meets and gives none of it back. Left alone, it wouldn't have cared whether it took Piper too. I held it back so it wouldn't. That part is only ever the maker's to do. Luna came back into her woman's shape, looked at the emptied ground, and said, with something close to awe, that her power of darkness was meant to devour everything without mercy or aim, and that a man who could steer it, spare a friend from it, and stop it on a coin had a skill beyond anything she'd known. Piper heard that and looked at her own hands. "Everything's just gone," she said, quiet. I could see her measuring the gap between what she'd done and what I'd done, and coming up short in her own eyes and setting her jaw to close it. The little girl tugged my sleeve and thanked us both, big brother, big sister, and told us she came from a village nearby. Lindenmore, she called it. Piper and I traded a look at the name. Neither of us had heard it before. "Take us there," I told her. She led the way up off the river, and I followed my own new road into the first quiet trouble of a land that was somehow, now, mine to look after. The girl led us up off the river, and the first thing I understood about Lindenmore was that it was dying. Half the roofs had fallen in. No smoke, no dogs, no voices, just wind coming down off the white peak, and something wrong riding it that crawled up the back of my neck. The girl skipped ahead through the wreckage, proud of it, calling for her grandfather. A shape came out of the nearest doorway to meet her. Piper's blade was clear of its sheath before I'd finished the breath. Scales, a long snout, a lizardman where an old man's voice had answered. "Get behind me, my lord. That's a monster," Piper said, already moving to put herself between us. But the child ran to the creature instead of away from it, threw her arms wide, and stood in the gap with tears starting down her face. "Don't bully Grandpa," she told us. And the lizardman pressed its whole body to the dirt and begged, not for itself, for the village. "Piper, put it away." She did, slow, watching. The chief's name was Sebastian, and he had been a man a season ago. He told me what had taken him, his rough voice cracking on every second word, a curse that turned them a little more with each passing day. The grown ones fast, the children slow. Even the church's holy water had run off it like rain off stone. He turned the girl gently by the shoulder and showed me the first gray scales spreading between her shoulder blades. "The curse came down off the mountain," he said, "from a white dragon god who had loved a king an age ago and gone mad with grief when the king died. The lords before me had heard all this and decided the monsters and the weeping god were easier to forget than to fix, so they forgot. I crouched by Sebastian and looked at him the way I look at a cracked blade. The circle rose in my sight, the blueprint of him laid bare, the cursed cells sitting in it like flaws hammered into good iron. I brought Mjolnir down soft, broke the flaws, set them right. The scales sank back into skin, the snout drew in, and an old man knelt where the lizard man had been, staring at his own two human hands. And the girl slammed into him hard enough to knock him flat, sobbing that he was back. "Bring me everyone the curse has touched," I told them. "I'll mend them all. Then I'm going up the mountain for the one who's been hurting you." By the time I climbed to the cave, the church had beaten me to it. Holy knights in blessed silver had charged in to slay the cursed dragon, straight past the one person who told them not to. The dragon's breath had met them at the door. I won't dwell on what a poison that eats stone does to men who trusted their armor, only that when I came over the last rise, they were all down, alive and unable to rise, calling for help no one could give. A young woman in a saintess's white robes knelt in the middle of it, pouring everything she had into a barrier already coming apart. Her light guttered. The breath rolled toward her like a tide. I brought the hammer down once. A wall of the mountain itself stood up between them and the dragon, thick, seamless, holding where holy steel had melted. And in the same ring of that single strike, every fallen knight came whole again, hauled back from the edge in a heartbeat, gasping on ground that had nearly been their grave. The saintess turned and found me standing there with a hammer over my shoulder. Later she'd tell me she named me in that instant. Not a man, something else. "You feel it too," she breathed. "The curse. It's not in the beast. It's in the whole mountain, all around us." I told them, and not one of them would listen to me. I know. I nodded past her, to the men climbing shakily to their feet. "Get them out. Whatever's down there is mine to answer." Her name was Christine, and she followed me in. The passage opened into a hall the size of a cathedral, and there she was, a dragon, vast, wound head to tail in violet slime that dripped and smoked where it fell. She wasn't roaring at me. She was weeping, the long, hollow weeping of a thing that has forgotten anyone is left alive to hear it. Ages of it, leaking down the mountain as a curse she didn't even know she was casting. She saw me and breathed, because that was all the grief knew how to do now. The poison came like a wall of rot, and I reached into the air itself, into the raw magic that fills it, and I pulled a barrier out of nothing and set it between us. A holy barrier made from empty air. Behind me, Christine made a sound like the floor had dropped out of the world. That, it seemed, was meant to be impossible. The dragon charged the wall of light. I didn't want to break her. She was broken enough, so I made the barrier soft, elastic, and she struck it and rebounded and stuck fast, thrashing crashing, unhurt. Then I wrapped a thin skin of that same light around myself and walked straight through her poison to put my hand on her. The circle rose, huge, older than anything I'd read before, and the flaws in it went down and down, centuries deep. The same cursed cells I'd cleaned out of one old man that morning, only grown into a god. I set Mjolnir against it, deconstruct, reconstruct. The hammer rang, and the ring did not stop where a sound should. The violet slime sloughed off her in sheets and hissed away to nothing. Underneath it, the scales came through clean and white as the snow on the peak, catching a light that hadn't been in that hall a moment before. The smoke thinned, the weeping stopped. Her wings opened, enormous, feathered at the edges like a great eagle's, and for the first time in longer than a kingdom's memory, the whole cave was bright. She came down light as falling snow and stood there trembling, looking at her own white claws as if they belonged to someone else. When she spoke, it was a woman's voice, dry and frank, and about 1,000 years too old for the wonder in it. My body, it came back. She turned her long head to me. You healed me. Me. Do you even know what I am? She lowered that great head almost to the floor. A bow. I'm a descended god, and you don't look the least bit impressed with yourself. Thank you, Adrian. She told me her name was Lauren, and that the whole territory, Lordale, the land the Empress had handed me, had been named for her long ago by a king who'd loved her and then done the one thing kings do that gods can't forgive. He died. She'd crawled up this mountain to grieve him and never come down. I told her I'd only fixed something broken. She laughed, wet and disbelieving. But I was already looking past her at the walls because something in them had been wrong since I stepped inside. And now that the smoke was gone, I could see it plain. A second design under the stone, a barrier worked into the very rock, meant to hold a descended god fast, and braided all through it. Another spell, patient and cruel, one that took whatever sorrow she carried and made it run wild and wilder and never let it burn out. This cave had not caught her by accident. Someone had led her here, built a cage around her mourning, and turned her grief into a weapon aimed down the mountain at her own king's people. Lauren went very still as she understood it with me. I had no name yet for the hand that had done it, but I filed away the shape of it and promised myself I would find one. Christine sank to her knees and said the thing she'd been holding since the wall went up, that I was a god come down to earth, that she finally understood. I'm a craftsman, I told her, gently as I could. A man with a good hammer, not a god. Please get up. She didn't, quite, but she stopped saying it out loud, which I counted as progress. A god shouldn't have to live in a hole in the ground, so I fixed that too. I set the hammer to the whole cavern and took it apart and put it back the way I wanted. Walls, stairs, high rooms, a chandelier grown straight out of the living rock. Deconstruct, reconstruct, on and on until the cave was a castle. But somewhere in the work, the space itself changed quality, thickened, and Lauren gave a shout, because a descended god, she said, is too weak in our thin world to ever wear a human shape, unless she stands in a divine domain, which, without the faintest idea I was doing it, I had just built her. When the light settled, a young woman stood where the dragon had been, white hair to her waist, a white dress, eyes the blue of deep ice, blinking at her own hands and shrieking that she was human, actually human. Piper had come back up the mountain looking for me, taken one look at the girl who used to be a dragon, and given up being surprised by me for good. Lauren had been a librarian once, before the grief, and she knew things. When I peeled off my glove to show her how I'd shaped rock into a chandelier, the sun crest burned gold into the back of my right hand. She went white to the lips. The golden hand, she called it. A blessing the world had handed out only a handful of times since it was made. And then she remembered a crest exactly like it, set into the floor of a chamber deep in the old cave. We found it. My hand and the mark in the floor rang like two struck bells. A worldsmith's workshop, hidden under a god's prison. Nobody builds those two things together by chance either. I put my hand flat to the crest, and the floor took me. I came out standing in a city, a whole city, buried. Streets and towers under a ceiling painted to look like open sky. Walls painted into forest. All of it raised by a golden hand before mine, and left swallowed by the mountain. Past its edge, the ground fell away into a labyrinth that went down forever. One of the 7 prisons, Lauren told me straight into my thoughts, her voice gone thin. Only 7 of them in all the world. Only one ever found by human feet before this. No trace of any magic on the air down there. No one had ever stood where I was standing. I only wanted the materials, honestly. I dialed a demon god's worth of ruin down to a whisper, cracked a slab of the unbreakable floor loose, dropped it in a black box, and struck my hammer against a fistful of charcoal. The powder scattered across parchment into a perfect map of the whole maze. I'd used the first blow as sound and listened to the place come back. Lauren stopped being amazed somewhere around then and started being suspicious. A man who could do all this, she asked, and history remembers him as what, a smith? The Worldsmith line was gone from every book she'd ever guarded, she said, scrubbed out clean, as if someone had wanted the world to forget men like me had ever walked it. The same someone, I thought, who builds cages under God prisons. I didn't say it out loud, but I was starting to feel the edges of one very large, very patient hand. I stepped back out of the workshop thinking I'd been gone an hour. Piper hit me like a thrown spear, arms locked around me, face in my chest, crying before I could get a word out, because out here, 10 days had passed. 10. The prison ran its own time, Lauren explained over the sound of Piper not letting go, and it ran crooked. An hour below could be 10 days above, and sometimes it ran the other way, and there was no telling which. 10 days she'd waited, not knowing if I was coming up at all. That was the part I couldn't stand, not the lost time. The picture of her at the mouth of a hole in the mountain, counting. So I gave her the thing I'd made her from a scrap of that unbreakable dungeon stone, a little crescent moon, made to sit in her hair, glowing faint as a coal. "You made this for me?" she asked very quietly. "Step outside a second," I told her. She did, and Lauren went with her, and I spoke low to my hammer. "Piper, can you hear me?" And out in the yard, both of them heard my voice come clear out of the crescent moon. Lauren nearly fell over. "A voice that crosses any distance," she said, "was lost art. The crystals that once did it were gone. Sell one of these," she told me, "and you could buy a duchy." "I didn't make it for money," I said. "I made it so that the next time I'm down there for 10 days, she never has to wonder again." Piper came back in with the moon already pinned in her hair and both hands pressed over her mouth, and then she was crying all over again. The good kind this time, the kind that comes from being made something impossible just because you were worth it to somebody. She called me the kindest, greatest craftsman who ever lived, until I had to look at the floor. There were 2 broken things left in Lindenmore, and only one of them was the houses. I flew down on Lauren's back, Piper white-knuckled beside me, and old Sebastian came out ready to run at the sight of a dragon over his village, until Piper stood up in the wind and shouted that this was the god whose curse I'd already broken, come to make it right. Little Nora reached us first, of course. The houses I mended in an afternoon, every ruined roof knit whole and reinforced with dungeon stone so nothing short of the mountain falling would take them down. A wall raised around the whole of it. Then I built a fountain in the square, reached a tunnel through space to the far river so it would never run dry, and set a single one of Lauren's white scales in the basin. The water came up healing. A sick man drank a cupful, his fever of weeks simply gone, and he laughed out loud in the street. That was when the villagers turned to Lauren and thanked her. Just thanked her. She'd flown down braced to be hated for it. Instead, the people she'd hurt handed her a fountain full of her own kindness and called it a gift. She put her human hands over her face and wept, and nobody had done a thing to her this time. She was just finally forgiven. The messenger owl reached me 2 days later, and everything warm in me went cold. Caroline had lost. The ice hero, the strongest blade in the kingdom, had gone against something none of us had a name for and been carried back broken. Her holy sword, Frost shattered doing it. I was in Carter by nightfall. I found her in a hospital bed, wrapped in bandages, smaller than I'd ever seen her. She told it flat, the way she tells everything, a monster too big to fight, and Frost freezing it solid at the price of its own body. Then the flat voice cracked straight down the middle. "Frost," she said, wasn't a sword to her. Frost was the only family she had ever had, and the woman who never wept put her bandaged hands over her eyes and came apart. I knew what I was supposed to tell her. A holy sword is alive, and when a living thing dies, you cannot call it back. Even my grandfather, the finest hand this craft ever had failed at exactly this and sworn it couldn't be done. I said, "Let me have the core." She opened her hand, and there it was, a sky blue gem off the hilt, the sword's whole soul folded into it, and I felt the warmth still in it under my fingers, barely, fading even as I held it. Whatever I was going to do, I had until that warmth ran out to do it. So I did the thing no craftsman before me had ever managed, because a woman I cared about was crying, and I could not stand it. I took the 5 skills in my hand, and I forced them together into one that had never existed, Holy Relic Repair. The blueprint flared up bright. I fed materials into it out of my box, and I brought the hammer down while my whole right arm burned gold to the shoulder, folding the fading soul and the new steel into one flawless blade. The gem woke. The sword drew a breath it had no lungs for. Caroline? She grabbed it off my hands and held it against her chest and sobbed its name over and over, rocking whole again. Behind me, Piper was crying too, and laughing, and telling anyone who'd listen that I wasn't a smith at all. I was a god of creation, a god of making, and she'd known it all along. I let them have it. I was too tired to argue, and for once, looking at Caroline holding her family in her arms, I didn't much want to. The lion had been a god once. That was the part Raina couldn't stop thinking about while it tried to kill her. She told me all of it afterward, so I'll tell it the way she did. A mountain of a beast crouched in the grass, carved from old ice, wound head to tail in black worm things that moved on their own. An evil god, the soldiers called it, a true god long ago, until a curse got into it and hollowed it out and left only the rage. Caroline had crossed its path on her way to find me and hadn't been able to kill it. All she could do was freeze it and run for help. The seal was cracking when Raina arrived. She could hear it, a thin crackle under the roaring, ice giving up one hairline at a time. She sent Caroline back to the capital to recover and put herself between the thing and everyone else. Then the cracks opened and the black tentacles came pouring out, and the Imperial soldiers emptied their weapons into them for nothing. Cut 1 and 2 grew back. Worse than that, the things fed. One soldier got wrapped before anyone could reach him, and Raina saw his strength go out of him and into them, saw them swell fat on it. I won't linger on what that looked like, only that she couldn't cut him loose without cutting him, and she couldn't pull him free with her hands, because a bare touch passed the curse straight into the rescuer. Her whip sword lashed out. Thunder Serpent, a rope of lightning that burned one tentacle to ash. It wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. Then the seal shattered all the way, and the evil god stood up. So she did the thing she'd sworn she would never do again. Her holy sword, Thunderthorn, had a spirit in it, an old, gentle voice she called Thunder, who'd carried her for years and never once complained about how rough she was with him. Her forbidden strike would spend all her magic and shave years off his life. She asked him. He told her his mind had been made up a long time ago and to swing without flinching. She used the little golden eye I'd given her, the eye of the Time King, and froze the god still for one held breath. She raised Thunderthorn and called down a storm, and the whip became a serpent of white lightning as wide as a river, the Storm Emperor World Serpent, and brought it down. It tore the field open. It dug a crater you could have hidden a village in. When the light died, Thunderthorn lay in shards at her feet. Her magic was gone, and the evil god stood in the smoke without a mark on it and roared. Raina dropped to her knees. She'd spent everything, and everything hadn't been enough, and the thing was already turning toward her. That was when I heard it, a single clean clack, the sound of something hard set down on something harder. I don't blame her for not understanding it. One instant, the ground was a ruin, and her sword was dust, and her arms were empty. The next, the grass was whole. The crater was gone, as if no one had ever dug it. Her magic came flooding back into her like a tide turning, and Thunderthorn was in her hands again, remade, humming. A wall of light snapped up around the evil god and held it where it stood. Lauren came down out of the sun with me on her back and Piper clinging behind me, her white wings throwing shade across the whole field. I slid off before she'd finished landing. "Sorry I'm late," I said. Raina turned around, and every hard line in her face came apart at once. "Teacher," she said, and then louder, breaking. "Teacher, you came." Lauren settled her great white bulk between the soldiers and the barrier, folding those eagle-feathered wings. She was looking at the lion, not at me. "Adrian, that beast, it's the way I was," she said quietly. "It isn't evil, it's in pain. Something crawled inside it, and it can't get out." I knew. I'd already read it. Piper pressed close to my shoulder, ears flat, watching the black things writhe against the light. "First things first, Raina's sword had died to save people, and I don't leave good work broken. I took Thunderthorn from her, found the fractures where the storm had blown through it, and mended them the way I mend anything. See the flaw, break it, set it right. Only this time, I set it a little better than it had been. When I handed it back, the spirit inside spoke, and I heard him plain, the same way I'd once heard Luna in a dark shrine. An old man's voice, astonished. He said he'd known I was no ordinary hand, but to mend a holy sword outright, to make it more than it was, he didn't have the words. Raina's eyes went wet all over again. "You fixed him. You made him stronger. Try it," I said. She flicked the whip at the nearest tentacle and it burned away and did not grow back. She stared. She laughed, wild and thick. "It's permanent now. Teacher, they stay dead? That is so like you." "Then that's your job." I nodded at the seething black. "You keep the tentacles off everyone out here. Lauren, Piper, you hold the line with her." I looked at the wall of light and the mountain of cursed god behind it. "The lion's mine." Piper caught my sleeve. Alone? He wants to be saved, I said. He just can't say so. I stepped through the barrier and let it close behind me. I'd wrapped a thin skin of hardened air around myself on the way in. The lion took that skin off me with one swipe, claws through it like it was nothing, and I understood I'd underestimated the thing. So I changed the terms. I turned my craft on myself, read my own body the way I read steel, and rewrote it, muscle and bone and nerve, faster and stronger than a man is built to be. It only lasts a while. It only needs to. After that, it wasn't much of a fight, and I won't dress it up. I broke every claw on its paws before it landed the next blow, and I put it down with a hammer swung the size of a door, and it went still, breathing, alive. I didn't kill it. You don't kill the victim. Set in the middle of its forehead, under the fur, was a jewel, red, fist-sized, with a single black slit down the center of it like a pupil. I read it the way I read everything, and what I read turned my stomach. It was made. Someone had drawn it up on purpose, every cruel line of it, built so that pulling it out the wrong way would kill whatever it rode, built to hurt and built to hold. I didn't pull it. I raised the hammer and brought it down and smashed the thing to grip. The tentacles all went out at once, like lamps. The great body under me shrank and settled, and the beast lifted its head, and it was a lioness. She, not it. I'd had that wrong too, with clear gold eyes and a mind behind them again. Am I alive? Her voice was low and old and wondering. She looked at me a long moment. Thank you, child of man, for not killing me, for pulling me out. I'd have liked to leave it there, but the curse didn't die when the jewel broke. It gathered instead, all that spilled black drawing up off the ground into a shape, a rough man thing woven out of tentacles, and set into its face one huge red eye with that same slit down the middle, staring at me. It shook with fury. It had watched its perfect work come apart in an afternoon, and it could not understand how. Then it told me why. Because a made thing can't help boasting of its maker. You've wrecked it, his finest piece, ruined by a nobody with a hammer. The ashen craftsman does not forgive vandals. Malachi made me, and Malachi will bury you for this. And there it was. Not a monster, not a stray curse. A name, a hand. Someone had drawn up the jewel that hollowed out this god and rigged the prison that broke Lauren's heart open. And I'd have bet my grandfather's hammer it was the same someone who'd handed my brother a little dark stamp in a doorway. All of it, one man's work. A craftsman, like me, who used the craft to build cages for living things. I have a long temper. It ran out right there. You're the one who's out of line, I told the thing. Made or not, right now, I am furious, and I'm going to take you apart. It came at me, and I learned the next hard thing fast. I pulled an iron spear straight up out of the ground and drove it through the eye thing's chest, and it passed clean through, like stabbing smoke. I dodged on my rebuilt legs, and the tentacles followed me anyway, patient, everywhere. Ordinary steel couldn't touch it. It kept crowing that very thing, that gods can't be wounded by what human hands make. And it was almost right. Only a divine weapon can cut a god, and a real divine weapon can't be forged by any human at all. I own exactly one. My grandfather's hammer, Mjolnir, the genuine article, and I wasn't about to gamble the only true thing I had against a swarm that ate holy swords for breakfast. So I reached for the skill I like least in the world. A black box opened in the air at my hand. I'd rather not use it, ever. But a soulless copy that saves a life still saves the life. I drew out of it a sword of light, a perfect fake of the blade they call Excalibur, and it went through the eye thing where the iron hadn't, and the eye thing screamed that it was impossible. Then I opened 100 of the boxes at once. 100 blades of light hung in the air around me, each one a copy of a weapon no living smith could make. Excalibur, and the spear Gungnir, and the shield Aegis, the memory of every divine thing the hands before me had ever held. The construct's one eye went wide. It called it a museum. It called it a lie. It didn't matter what it called it. I sent all of them home at once. They riddled it from every angle, and where they struck, the black came apart and did not knit back. It thrashed and shrank and finally simply wasn't. And as each blade faded, because that's all they do, a single minute of life and then nothing, hollow things that never had a soul in them at all, I said the thing I always say to them, quiet, because somebody should. Sorry, everyone. Then my legs went out from under me. I'd spent it all, right down to the floor, and the field tipped sideways and went dark. I woke up in a hospital bed with a slice of apple at my mouth. Adrian, say ah, Piper said, beaming. And I did, because it's easier than arguing with her. The doctor had already told me I could go the moment my magic came back, and it had come back with sleep. the way it always does. That didn't get me out of being fussed over. Caroline stood on the other side of the bed with her arms crossed. "Step back, Raina. I'll attend to him. You'll attend to him." Raina snorted and hooked a thumb at herself. "I'm the teacher's woman. Move." They'd been at it apparently for a while. The Empress came in the middle of it, and everyone remembered themselves and bowed. Artemis young again, bright and quick, worried right down to her hands. She insisted I take a full examination, even though I'd plainly recovered, and she apologized for the land she'd given me being poisoned, for not knowing, for all of it. Raina told me, grave as a funeral, that if I hadn't come, the Empire would have been rubble. I didn't much like the way they were all looking at me. "I'm not strong," I said. "The divine weapons are strong. I only made copies of them." You'd have thought I'd said something in another language. The whole room went quiet and stared. The Empress found her voice first. She said her heart wouldn't rest until she'd repaid me. Name anything. Land, gold, rank, anything at all. I'd already known what I'd ask for. Above the capital, too big to land, Lauren was listening, and she'd carried her guilt about that cursed territory like a stone since the day I freed her. Guilt for harm that was never hers, that a stranger had reached in and forced out of her grief. "Then pardon Lauren," I said. "The dragon god. Someone cursed her and used her sorrow to do all of it. She never chose any of it. Clear her name. That's my whole reward. I don't want the rest." Artemis looked at me for a moment like she was trying to solve me. Then something in her softened. "Very well," she said. "As your reward, the matter of the dragon god Lauren shall not be pursued. She is guiltless before the Empire." Caroline picked that moment to realize I'd been made an imperial noble and went pale. "Since when is Adrian part of the Empire? He's the kingdom's, he's mine too." She caught herself. "Who tends my sword now?" "I'll take care of yours too," I said. "Same as always." She went scarlet to the ears and walked straight out of the room, and I genuinely did not understand why. Lauren heard all of it from where she circled, white and enormous over the capital, and her voice came into my head thick and shaking. She told me I really was something else. She told me thank you over and over, and I felt the words come apart in the middle. A god who had grieved for 1,000 years, weeping now because someone had finally said out loud that none of it had been her fault. I let her cry. She'd earned it, but I lay back on that hospital pillow with the name still sitting in my chest like a coal. Malachi, the ashen craftsman, the rigged prison under Lauren's mountain, the jewel in the lion's skull, the cursed dolls I'd have to go and find now, the little stamp in my brother's hand. Not bad luck, not scattered curses. One patient man, seating the whole world with cages, and I had his name at last. He'd made a thing that called me a nobody with a hammer. He was going to learn how wrong that was. The witch told her no, and then told her why, and Serena kept talking straight through both. I wasn't there for any of this part. I put it together afterward, out of what she finally said to me, out of a wreck in a meadow, out of a mother in a hospital bed. So I'll give it to you the way I came to understand it. She had gone to the Comet Pavilion because it was the last door left. The guild she'd built her name on was coming apart, craftsman by craftsman, ever since a junk blade went out its doors stamped as top rank. So she stood in a stranger's shop and begged its owner to come save Hartwell. And the owner, a sharp young witch with glasses and a child of her own in the back, said she was busy. Serena pushed. She said every craftsman in the kingdom had already turned her away. The witch didn't soften at that. She said a blade that fails in the field gets someone killed, and Serena had sold that blade with her own name on the receipt, so the fault was hers to carry. Serena tried to hand it off. She said it was Damon who'd made the mess, Adrian who'd left the hole. The witch cut her flat. A leader who never valued the people who mattered and never caught her own man's fraud doesn't get to point down the ladder. So Serena reached for the last card she had. She said she was carrying a child, that if the guild fell, the baby had nothing. The witch looked at her for a long moment and then said the one thing that ended it. "Don't spend a child like a coin, girl. Not with me." She refused for the last time. Then she turned a newspaper around on the counter so Serena could read it. There was a headline about a bankrupt trading company, and under it, another one, a hero who had saved the empire, and the hero's name was Adrian. Serena read it twice, and then she was already gone, out the door, sure down to her bones that the man she'd thrown away could fix everything if she only knelt low enough. Damon had seen the same newspaper first. He'd read the word hero next to his brother's name, and he'd torn the page to pieces with his hands. When Serena came home and said the two of them should go to the empire and apologize, he came off the wall at her. He shoved her back a step, snarling that he would never bow his head to Adrian, not if it killed him. She caught her balance and told him the truth she'd been holding, that she was carrying his child, and that begging Adrian was the only way left to save any of it. That stopped him for one breath. Then it made everything worse, because when she was done, tired and past caring, she said the plain cruel thing out loud, that he simply had no talent as a craftsman and never had. I know exactly where those words landed in him. Our father had said the same thing to Damon when we were boys, not as a wound, but as a shove toward finding his own road. Damon had carried it as a curse instead, for 20 years. He clutched at her sleeve like a drowning man and asked if she was throwing him away too. She slapped his hand loose. She told him to stay home and behave, be a good boy, and she walked out to go and grovel to me alone. Then Damon was alone on the floor of a workshop that had never once obeyed his hands. He beat the flagstones until something rattled loose off a shelf and landed beside him, a small dark stamp, the one a smiling stranger had pressed into his palm a long while back, the same stamp that had disguised the junk blade as treasure and cost Serena a fortune in the first place. He picked it up. He decided he would use it to win her back, to finally be worth something without his brother's shadow lying over him. And a thread of black mist began to rise off his shoulders. I would only understand this later, when I'd seen enough of it to know it on sight. It was the same mist that had wept off a chained dragon god, the same that had coiled around a god turned into a lion, a curse, taking root in a man who had opened the door himself. It thickened around him in the dark, and it was patient, and he never felt it settle in. Serena took the magic train toward the Empire. It was a new thing in that country, vast and rare, and it ran without stopping all the way to the capital. A few seats down, a little girl was crying because the head had come off her cloth doll, and her mother had no needle, no thread, nothing to mend it with. A hooded man across the aisle stirred, reached over, and closed his right hand around the doll. When he opened it, the doll was whole. He'd done it with one touch, no tools at all. Serena saw the mark on the back of that hand, a small sun-shaped crest, the golden hand, the very same gift I carry. Her whole ruined mind lit up at it, and she leaned in and asked if he was some famous smith she could hire. He turned her down easy and pleasant. He said he wasn't anything so grand, only a traveler, making a certain something, and he'd been at it a very long time. Then he pressed a candy into her hand and told her it would set her mind at ease. She ate it, and every knot in her, the guild, the debts, the child, the fear, all of it went soft and far away, like it belonged to some other woman she'd only heard about. Her eyes got heavy. Nothing seemed to matter at all. The hooded man rose and said he'd be getting off at the next stop. The mother, puzzled, said this train didn't stop until the capital. He only smiled and stepped toward the door, and Serena, drifting under the candy's warm tide, watched the little girl wave goodbye at his back. Then the train left the rails. I won't walk you through it. The machine came apart in a meadow, and among the ones it struck down was the little girl who had waved. That is as far into it as I'll go. It was a horror, and it was quiet by the time it was over. The hooded man stood on the embankment above the wreck, off the train that couldn't have let him off, and he watched it with something like fondness. He drew the mended doll out of his coat and turned it in his fingers, and black mist bled up off it into the light. The doll had been a curse from the moment he'd touched it. The mend was the murder. He looked down at what he had made, unhurried, in no danger, and he gave the empty air his name. Malachi, he said, the ashen craftsman, the one who makes the cursed things. He said it the way another man might read out a title he was proud of. Then he tucked the doll away and started walking, and the black mist that leaked off it drifted loose from his hand and went trailing away, low over the grass, toward the capital. Word of the crash reached me in the capital, and I told Lauren to fly faster than she ever had. We came down on her white back into a meadow full of the worst thing I'd seen in weeks. The train lay on its side, thrown a half turn off the track. People were pinned and bleeding and calling out. Piper was off the dragon before we'd fully landed. I put my hand on my grandfather's hammer, and I let it show me the damage. Not just the iron of the train, but the people, the broken bones, and the torn insides, and the hearts that had already gone still. All of it laid out for me at once, like blueprints of everything wrong. Then I brought the hammer down and called the repair. It went out across the whole field in a single ring of light. The train rolled upright onto its wheels, straightening as it turned, the crumpled metal drawing smooth, and every person in that meadow drew a sudden breath at the same instant, bones knitting, wounds closing. The ones whose hearts had stopped simply starting again, sitting up, blinking, whole, all of them, at once. Lauren said it was as if I'd become a god. I told her my craftsman level had probably just gone up from forging so many divine things, which was true, and which did not remotely cover it. We went seat by seat to be sure, and that was where a woman on her knees in the grass looked up, saw my face, and broke. It was Serena. She crawled to me and pressed her forehead down and begged me to forgive her. Sorry, over and over, that she'd been wrong, that she saw it now. I stood there and I felt almost nothing move in me, not triumph, not even anger anymore, just a flat, tired quiet. I didn't lift her up. I didn't tell her it was all right. I told her only that she'd been a passenger too, that she should get herself examined with the others, and that we would talk later. Then I turned back to the wreck, because the wreck was the part that mattered, and she was not. Once everyone was safe and away to the Capitol Hospital, Piper and I walked the tracks to find out what had done this. There was nothing. No cracked rail, no worn wheel, no scorch or scar of any spell. A brand new machine had thrown itself off a perfect track for no reason a single eye could find. Except I found it, seeping up out of one 4-person seat, pooling over the cushions, and then sliding out the open window was a thin trail of black haze. I knew that color. I'd fought it wearing a lion's body. "Piper," I said, "you really can't see the black on that seat?" She followed my hand and saw grass and daylight and nothing else. Whatever it was, it had been left for me alone to notice, and it was going somewhere, out the window, low to the ground, pointing straight back at the Capitol I'd just come from. I told her we were leaving now, and I meant it. The thing that mirrored my own gift had been on this train, and it had walked off with a head start. Piper carried me the last stretch into the Capitol at a dead run, which was as fast as we had and more embarrassing than I'll admit. And the black haze led us the whole way, right up the steps of the Imperial Hospital and down a corridor to one closed door. Inside, a little girl sat on the bed next to her mother, who lay too still. Piper checked her and went quiet, and gave me a small shake of the head. The woman had stopped breathing. The haze was pouring off the doll in the girl's arms. The same doll, the same curse I'd read in a lion's brow, folded now into a child's toy. I knelt to the girl's level and told her I was a doll doctor, and that her friend there looked like it was hurting, and asked if she'd lend it to me a moment. She held it a breath longer. Then she put it in my hands. I laid out the circle and let the hammer show me the shape of the curse, every cruel line of how it was built. And instead of smashing it, I turned it inside out. I took the thing meant to spread nothing but misfortune, and I rebuilt it around the opposite. Mend where it was made to break, comfort where it was made to kill. The black haze thinned and went out like a blown candle. The doll warmed in my hands and glowed soft, and its worn cloth face settled into something lovely and kind. And behind me, the mother pulled in a long breath and sat up, alive, reaching for her daughter, who was already halfway across the bed door. The girl named the doll on the spot, her Super Rosie, and Super Rosie, to everyone's plain astonishment but the child's, said thank you in a small, gentle voice. "Thank you, doll doctor." She said she'd have become a thing that carried only misery, and now she wouldn't. When the mother had her arms back around her girl, I asked her quietly how the doll had come to be mended. She remembered a hooded man on the train, after the head tore off, a man whose face and body she never once saw, who fixed it with a touch and gave it back. That was all the trail he'd left me. A hood, a touch, and a mark shaped like the sun. Serena was in that same hospital, somewhere down a hall I hadn't walked yet, waiting on her knees for an answer I hadn't decided to give. She could keep waiting, because a patient man with my own gift in his hand was loose in this city, and the black haze was already ahead of me, and there was only one of those two things I could still catch tonight. By the time I carried the mended doll back to the little girl's ward and set it in her arms, the healing had already run ahead of me down every hall in the building. I hadn't meant to do it. When I reversed the curse on that doll, and the mother pulled in her first breath, the pulse of the repair rolled out past the door and kept going, room after room, the way a struck bell keeps ringing after your hand leaves it. It found the sick and the dying, and it did not ask them who they were. A boy who hadn't walked in 2 years came out of a doorway on his own legs. Down the corridor, a man who'd been given 3 months stood up out of his bed and couldn't stop touching his own chest, as if checking the news was real. The doctors had gathered at the nurse's station and stopped pretending to work. One of them said the word out loud, quiet, like he was afraid of it. He asked whether a god had come down among them. I wanted to tell him no. I was a blacksmith with a good hammer and a long day behind me, and I had somewhere to be. "They're going to build a shrine to you if we stay much longer," Piper murmured at my shoulder, her ears twitching at every gasp that went up behind another door. Her tail had gone soft and proud. She was watching me the way she did when she forgot to be careful about it. I wasn't watching any of it. Somewhere in this building, a thread of black haze maze was still trailing out toward the Capitol, and the man who'd made it had a head start on me. That was the only miracle I cared about undoing. I turned to go find it. That was when she found me first. Serena stepped out of the alcove where she'd been standing. I learned afterward she'd watched the whole thing from the hall. The doll, the boy's legs, the dying man on his feet, and that she hadn't seen a miracle at all. She'd seen a number. She'd stood there doing arithmetic on what a man who could do that was worth, and how much of it could be bottled and sold under the Hartwell name. She said my name softly. She told me she'd wanted to see me. She said she was sorry. For a moment, the word just hung there between us, and I waited for the rest of it, because I already knew there was a rest. There was. She wanted me to come back. Back to the company, back to Hartwell, back to the forge she and my brother had taken while I kept the fire lit for them. She said it gently, the way you'd coax a stray you meant to put back on its leash. She said we could start over. She said everything could go back to how it was. I refuse, I said. She blinked like she hadn't heard me right. Then she rearranged it in her head into something she could stand. I must have signed with some other house, some richer patron, and this was a negotiation. She started to argue terms. Piper got between us before I could. You've got some nerve, she said, and her tail had puffed out stiff as a broom, the way it did when she was truly angry. She named it plainly, right there in the corridor, so it couldn't be softened. The betrayal, the theft, the man they'd thrown out and expected to keep working the anvil in the morning. He has a purpose that matters, and it isn't you. He has no time for you at all. Leave. Serena looked to me to overrule her. I didn't. I only reminded her of one thing. Once, when she still had everything and I still had nothing but the work, she'd stood in front of a room and declared the company's success was hers. All of it. Her vision, her hand, her name. That I had been a convenience she'd outgrown. I told her I remembered that. I told her I'd built my whole new life on believing her. Something in her face came apart then. The arithmetic stopped. She went down. Right there on the cold hospital floor, she put herself flat, forehead to the stone, in front of the doctors and the patients and my wolf. And she finally said the thing she'd sworn was a lie, that none of it had ever been hers, that every order she'd filled, every blade that carried Hartwell's mark, every year the company had grown, it had all been my hands. She'd known. She said she'd always known, and she begged me to forgive her. I looked down at the top of her head. I want to tell you I felt something. Rage, maybe. The clean, satisfying kind. Or the old ache. I'd carried both of those out of the Capitol with me like coals in my coat, and I'd fed them for a long time. But you can only feed a fire so long before you notice your hands are cold. I stood over the woman I was once going to marry, hearing her say every word I'd waited years to hear, and there was nothing left in the grate. No heat, no cruelty, just quiet. It's too late. I said it plainly. 2 words, no weight thrown behind them, because they didn't need any. The heat that would have made them cruel had gone out a long time ago, in a house I'd built with my own coin while they laughed on the other side of the wall. She'd finally come with the truth in her open hands. She'd just come to a man who no longer had a door for her to put it through. I watched the words land. I watched them go all the way down. Then her eyes rolled back, and the floor came up to meet her, and her world went black before mine even finished turning away. I was there when she woke, not at her side, by the door, on my way out of it. I'd waited only long enough to be sure she'd surface, and to leave what I'd come to leave. When her eyes opened and found me, something desperate flickered up in them, and I killed it before it could stand. I told her she'd fainted. I told her she was fine, and so was the child. That was the reason I'd stayed at all, and I said so because I wasn't going to let her mistake it for tenderness. There was a leather pouch on the table beside her bed with fare in it, enough to carry her home on the magic train, the gentler way to travel for a woman carrying a child. I'd settled her costs with the hospital on my way in. None of it was for her. I made that as flat as I could. It's not for you, I said. It's for the child. Even if the parents are worthless, the child hasn't done anything wrong. She started to cry. She tried to build something out of it. Gratitude, an opening, a way back in. I didn't give it room. I told her the plain shape of it so she'd stop reaching. I didn't forgive her. I wasn't going to. This was the last time she would see my face, and she should take the money and go home and raise her child and never come looking for me again. Goodbye, Serena. I closed the door on her weeping, and I meant to keep walking because the haze was still ahead of me, and the man who spun it hadn't slowed down. I didn't know yet that I'd left one of his threads behind me in that room, curled up small and patient in a paper wrapper, waiting for her to be exactly this alone. I wasn't in that room for what came next. I put it together afterward from the doctor and from what she told me herself, so I'll give it to you the way I came to understand it. Alone, she fell apart the way people do when there's finally no one left to perform for. She turned her betrayal over and over. She said out loud to the empty room that she wanted to go back, that if she'd only been honest, I would have forgiven honesty, and that she'd traded a good man for a shop and lost both. Then the heat started under her skin. It came up out of nowhere, a spreading burn from the inside, and through the panic, she remembered the train, the hooded stranger across the aisle, the candy he'd pressed into her hand with a kind smile, the one that had melted every worry into a warm gray nothing. She'd thought it was a mercy. A red mark bloomed across her like ink soaking through cloth, and the magic he'd folded into that sweet finally opened its hand. I won't walk you through what it did to her. That's not a thing you need to see. What matters is where it gathered, around the innocent life she carried, the child that had done nothing to anyone. The curse wrapped itself around the smallest, most blameless thing in the room and made it the center of the storm. They brought a curse doctor, not a village hedge witch, one of the 5 greatest in the world, an old man who'd unmade horrors that had no names. He looked a long time. Then he set his tools down. He told her the child held a well of magic far too vast for so small a form to carry, that the curse had cracked it open and left it spilling, unstable, more power pouring out than any body was ever built to hold. And he told her the truth he clearly hated to say. It was beyond him. It was, he thought, beyond anyone alive. At the heart of all that wild, blinding power was something reaching for her, a small shape, barely begun, putting out what you could only call a hand toward its mother. A thin cry came with it, hardly a word at all. "Mama," and she flinched back. She couldn't help it. The fear had her. The light was too much. And for one instant she recoiled from her own child, the way the whole world had once recoiled from things it didn't understand. The child felt it. The cry broke into something wretched, and the raw magic answered the hurt. A wave of pure sound that cracked the stone and threw the staff back against the walls. And in the middle of that, terrified, she remembered what I'd said to her a few hours before, that a child hasn't done anything wrong, that the sins belong to the parents and never to the small thing they made. So she did the first truly unselfish thing I ever knew her to do. She got up off the floor and she went toward the storm instead of away from it. She gathered that blazing, impossible child against her chest and held on. She told it she was sorry. Sorry she'd frightened it. Sorry for all of it. And she told it over and over that it wasn't to blame. Little by little, the surge folded down. The light eased. The child quieted against her, still holding on. That was when the door came off its hinges. Adventurers had felt the magic from 3 floors down and come running with steel out, and all they saw when they hit the doorway was a monster, a woman wrapped around a shape that poured light like a wound in a room that was already breaking. They didn't see a child. They didn't stop to. Their leader gave the order and they went at it. She turned her back to them and put her body over the child. I won't show you that either, only the outcome. She took what was meant for it and she did not let go, and the child felt her hurt the same way it had felt her flinch. Its power came up again, bigger this time, a rising note with no bottom to it, enough to bring the whole ward down on all of them. I felt it before I heard it. I was 2 floors down and halfway to the exit when the whole building lit up on the sense only I have. A black and blazing thing roaring up out of the ward I'd just walked away from. Malachi's work, the last thread of it, the one I'd left behind in a paper wrapper, opened up all at once. I didn't decide to run. I was already running. The door I came through wasn't a door anymore. The room was mid-collapse, the air full of screaming light and falling stone. An armed band scrambling back from a woman curled on the floor, around something too bright to look at directly. I saw the red mark on her. I saw the blood she wasn't guarding against. I saw what they'd taken her for, and what she'd chosen to be instead. "What?" I said. "Do you think you're doing to a child?" I brought the hammer down. I didn't strike anything. There was nothing to hit. I struck the shape of the whole ruined moment, the way I'd strike a flaw in cold iron, and I read every broken thing in that room at once, the way my grandfather taught me. The cracked walls, the torn woman, the curse knotted through a body that couldn't hold it, and I told all of it, in the only language I've ever really spoken, what it was supposed to be, and it obeyed. The stone drew itself back into the walls. The screaming light stopped screaming. The wounds on the woman on the floor closed and went quiet, the red mark thinning off her skin like a stain lifting out of cloth. And the curse, the thing Malachi had tied around the smallest life in the room, I took it apart thread by thread, and I did not throw it away. I turned it over. I rebuilt the child around it. Where the power had been a crack pouring out ruin, I made it a vessel that could hold what it carried, a small body built on purpose to be strong enough for the gift inside it. The blaze folded down into something you could look at, an infant. Nothing more and nothing less. Calm, whole, ordinary in every way that mattered, with only a faint warmth left glowing under the skin to say what it could someday be. It stopped crying. It blinked up at the ceiling and it breathed, and the room, for the first time since I'd kicked through the door, was quiet. Behind me, the old curse doctor was on his feet with both hands pressed to his mouth. He said it wasn't possible. He said the curse hadn't merely been lifted, the child's very body had been remade, and no one alive could do that. I let him think whatever kept him upright. Serena was staring at me from the floor, with the child safe against her, and she was trying to thank me. Through the tears, she got some of it out, my name, and that she was sorry, that she'd been a foolish woman, that she didn't deserve this. Reaching, one last time, for the smallest thread of what we used to be. I looked at her, and then at the child breathing easy in her arms, and I gave her the truth as plainly as I'd given her the other one. Don't misunderstand, I said. I didn't do it for you. I did it because a child hasn't done anything wrong, because the small blameless thing at the center of every disaster shouldn't burn for what the people around it chose. I'd have done the same for anyone's child, and I owed her nothing warmer than that, and I let her hear all of it in the flat of my voice. Then I shouldered the hammer and I left. I heard, later, what she did with it. She didn't come after me again. She took the fare and she went home to my brother and the failing shop and the wreck they'd made together, and she carried the child the whole way. She'd stop leaning on me, she told herself. She'd raise it herself. She'd build a life out of what was left of hers, on her own two hands this time, the way I'd had to. I hope she did. I mean that as coldly as it sounds. I hoped it the way you hope a stranger recovers, and then you don't think of them again, because I already had my back to that room. Somewhere ahead of me, my brother was sinking into the same black mist I'd just pulled out of a newborn, and the man who spun all of it hadn't been caught, and the debt those two owed me was nowhere near settled. Serena had gotten her reckoning tonight. It just wasn't the last one coming due. The fire was out, but the thing I was hunting was still very much alight, and it was still ahead of me. I told you my brother was sinking into a black mist somewhere ahead of me, and that the debt he owed wasn't near settled. I wasn't in the capital when it started, so I'll hand it to you the way I put it together afterward, from the nights and the wreckage and the one man who wanted me to see all of it. Damon came to the market alone, a big pack on his back, and a week of no sleep in his bloodshot eyes. On his right hand, the disguise stamp had stopped being a tool he held and started being part of him, its roots grown down into the flesh. He spread a mat on the stones, called himself the Hartwell Trading Company out loud, and started selling legends. Excalibur, Aegis, a famous bow, 1,000 gold apiece. A crowd came, the way a crowd always comes to something too good to be true. Then, one man near the front asked the only question that mattered, which was how a legendary blade ends up costing 1,000 gold. Damon had an answer ready. He thought he was clever. He thought the fools in front of him would hand him a fortune for painted scrap. The man didn't buy it. He said the cheapness was the tell, that a real legend never sells for pocket change, and only a fake ever needs to, Damon argued. The man looked at the fused stamp, at the sweating grin, and said the thing that took the floor out from under him. You've got no talent for this, and you never did. You're a copy of a copy. They were his father's words, near enough, and Damon had spent his whole life running from them. Here they were again, in a stranger's mouth, in front of 100 people. The black mist came up off his shoulders then, thin as smoke, and the stamp pushed its roots a little deeper. A knight cut through the crowd, asked for a vending permit Damon didn't have, and arrested him for it, not for the fakes. There was no proof of that yet, just for selling on the stones without leave. Damon screamed that he was the Hartwell Company's treasured craftsman while they bound his hands and hauled him off, and every person watching filed that name away next to the fraud. He wasn't thinking about the name. He was thinking he had disappointed his wife. They put him in a cell, and he wailed in it for days. Then Serena came. She looked worn all the way through, older than her years, the company's ruin sitting on her like a wet coat. She didn't come with comfort. She came angry. Angry that he'd used the Hartwell name without asking. Angry that he'd stood in a public market dressing garbage as legends. He told her he had done it for her. He had always thought she loved money, so he had tried to make her some. She slapped him. She had never run the company for money, she said. She'd run it to protect a thing her family built, and to grow it honestly. And those were not the same, and had never been the same. He didn't understand. He genuinely could not see the line between building something and simply getting coin. And watching him fail to see, it was, I think, the moment she stopped hoping. He begged her for bail. That was when she told him there was none to give. The coffers were empty and the company was finished, because in trade, the one thing you cannot lose is trust, and he had spent the last of theirs on a mat in the street. She came close to saying the ruin was his fault. She stopped herself. She still loved him enough not to put all of it in his hands out loud. He didn't hear the love in the sentence she left unfinished. He heard abandonment. He accused her of throwing him away for being useless, and she was too tired to fight it. She told him to stay where he was and do nothing else, and then she left. She left to go find money for his bail, though she never told him that, and he never knew it. He sat there certain that his father, his brother, the merchants, and now his wife had all discarded him, each in their turn. He wasn't alone as long as he thought. There was a man in the cell that no lock had let in, wrapped head to foot in gray cloth, standing in the corner as if he had always been there. I know that wrapping now. I have stood across from it. That night, he was only a patient shape admiring the stamp on my brother's hand, telling Damon he was the one who had made it and put it into his hand in the first place. He called himself a genius. Then he told Damon the same thing the market had, the same thing their father had, except softly, like a kindness, that he had no talent for making anything, none, and never would. Damon wept and admitted it. He said all he had ever wanted was talent, and that he hated every person born with the thing he wasn't. That was the opening the wrapped man had been waiting for. He said that if a gift wasn't given to you at birth, there was another way to come by one. You could take it from someone who already had it. He nodded at the wall, at the whole city packed beyond it with gifted people who had looked down their noses at Damon his whole life. Then he laid one finger on the stamp. The mist came up all at once. It poured off my brother and into him and through him and remade him. And I will spare you the shape of it, because it was no longer the shape of a man. Whatever was left of Damon in there made one promise, that he would take the talent of everyone who had ever had more than him. And then he tore the wall out of the jail and was gone into the streets. The wrapped man watched him go and said a single word to the empty cell. My title, the one nobody in that city knew, belonged to me. By the time I felt it on my sight, it was already tearing the heart out of the capital. The thing that had been my brother stood taller than the houses and brought them down with its arms. 10 adventurers came at it with steel and found that their sword skills simply would not come. The curse drained the very talent that lets a fighter fight, so their techniques died in their hands, and one man's iron blade shattered on the monster's guard like cheap pottery. And it didn't only steal, it wore what it stole, copying a technique the instant it drained one. Then Ariel came down, one of the finest adventurers in the capital, an S rank of the top guild. She dropped into the street with a spiked whip and drove the thing back a step, putting herself between it and the people who couldn't run. For a moment, she had it. She was fast and precise, and she had handled monsters her whole life. Then, mid-strike, it drained her too. Her whip went dead in the air, all its force gone out of it, and her arm dropped useless at her side. Nothing was cut from her. The skill was only pulled clean out, so the limb simply would not answer. The monster took the technique it had just stripped off her and used her own craft to put her down. She fell hard and did not get up. But she wasn't finished talking. Barely conscious, she got a hand around one of its arms. "You're nothing," she told it, "but a pitiful, talentless thing that lives by eating what other people earned." It understood her well enough to rage. It gathered its countless arms up into one massive hammer of limbs above her to end her for saying it. That was the moment I came around the corner. I brought my grandfather's hammer around and took the arm apart before it finished falling. One blow. The whole raised weight of it, every limb the monster had woven into that hammer, came apart in the air, and I stepped in over Ariel where she'd fallen and put myself between her and the thing. It reeled back and screamed. It screamed a name, mine, in a voice that had stopped being human somewhere in that cell. It still knew exactly who I was, and it hated me the way it had hated me since we were boys. I had tracked it here with a detector I'd built out of an old cursed thing, tuned to the mist I can see and no one else can, so I already knew before it turned what I was looking at. I just hadn't let myself believe it until it said my name, my brother, 19 years old, and turned into this. I want to tell you I felt only anger. There was anger. Under it, and heavier than it, was the plain grief of a man raising a hammer at his own blood. I made myself a rule, standing there in the wreckage. I was not going to kill him. I was going to stop him and cure him and make him stand on his own 2 feet afterward and answer for every stone of this. That was the last thing an older brother could still do for him. "This hammer makes things," I told the monster, low. "It was never meant for killing people. I'm not going to start with you," it answered by reaching into me and taking everything. I felt the golden hand go out like a snuffed candle. All 5 of the skills I had carried my whole life, and the storage that held my weapons, and every divine thing I owned, sealed shut in an instant the moment the curse drained the hand itself. Then it tried to use what it had stolen. It reached for infinite replication to pour divine weapons out of the empty air, the way it had seen me conjure whole armories, and nothing came. It had the skill. It had the exact tool. It had not one scrap of the understanding that made the tool work, and a key you can't read is only a lump of metal. I hit it again, and I hated the shudder that ran up my arm, because it was still my brother in there. Skills are keys, I said. That is all they are. Holding the key doesn't mean you know the door. It shrieked and threw the worst thing it had, all destruction, raw, with no limit set on it, because it had never learned that the skill runs wild if you don't cage what it puts out. The force came off it in every direction at once, enough to flatten what was left of the district. I got the hammer into the path of it and turned it down into the ground, and the street swallowed the blast instead of the people. The monster ground its stolen arms into the dirt and spat that I couldn't finish it anyway, not without a real weapon of my own, not with my hands sealed. It wasn't wrong. My power was gone, and I was standing over my brother with a crafting hammer and nothing else. The sky answered before I could. A shadow crossed the broken district, white and wide-winged and bright against the smoke, and Lauren came down out of the evening with 3 people on her back. The dragon god I had pulled out of a cursed prison, carrying to me the people I had pulled out of everything else. They came off her in a line. Caroline first, the ice hero, white hair, and that cold blade that sheds rainbow light, already reading the fight before her boots touched the stone. Raina next, loud even landing, her lightning coiled and snapping at her side, grinning at me like we were both late to the same party. And then Piper. I want you to understand what that was. When I found Piper, she was a beaten thing chained by the throat, worth nothing to the people who had caged her, and sure, she was worth nothing to anyone else. I gave her a sword, and she couldn't lift what it asked of her, not then. Now she dropped down into a ruined street with the dark holy sword night sky live in her hands, and set herself square between me and a monster, and her hands did not shake. The first person who ever thanked me and stayed had come to stand in front of me. They didn't make speeches. Piper said it plain, that I had saved every one of them with these hands, and now it was their turn to use theirs. Caroline only told Frost to go, and a road of ice ran out across the rubble. Raina cracked her lightning loose and told me to leave the big one to them, teacher, in a tone that dared me to argue. I didn't argue. You're heroes, I said. All of you. Buy me a little time. Then they hit my brother from 3 sides at once, dark and ice and lightning. And for the first time since I came around that corner, the monster was the one giving ground. And standing in the middle of that, with my hand dead and my brother screaming, I remembered my grandfather. Years back, in the low red light of Gideon's forge, he had taken my hand in both of his old ones. He told me something I had carried and never used. I was born with 5 skills where every other craftsman gets one, he said. But there was a 6th in me, mine and no one else's. And it hadn't surfaced yet because I wasn't ripe enough to hold a thing that big. When it finally came, and he swore it would, I was to use it rightly and to keep faith with the creed my father lived by. I had nodded the way you nod at an old man's prophecy. I hadn't thought about it in years. I thought about it now. Behind me, the heroes were spending the time I had asked for. Caroline froze the monster's flailing arms mid-swing so they couldn't grow back, and Raina and Piper came in behind the ice and cut the frozen limbs down. It bought minutes. Minutes were all I needed. Lauren landed beside me and folded those white wings, and I asked her for a scale. She gave it without a blink, then asked me what in the world I meant to do with a single scale and no skill left in my hand. She, of all of them, knew what I had lost when the golden hand went dark, because she knew my grandfather had been a worldsmith too. So she asked the gentle, practical question, the way you offer someone an easier road. Wouldn't killing him give it all back? The hand and the power and the fix for everything? He's my brother. That was the whole of my answer. I was not going to buy my power back with his life. I told her the truth I had only just understood myself. Even with the golden hand sealed, this right hand still held every single thing it had ever made. Every broken blade I had mended, every dying field I had brought back, every curse I had sat with until I found the blessing hiding inside it. All of it was still in the hand, in the calluses, in the knowing. Nobody could drain that out of me. It wasn't a skill, it was a life, and I felt it. I can't tell it to you any plainer than that. I felt that I could do this now. My right hand caught fire with light. Not mist, not stolen gold, but a clean and dazzling gold that lit the whole ruined street and threw every face into sharp relief. The monster saw it and came apart with panic, shrieking that it was impossible, that it had taken every skill I owned, that there was nothing left in me to burn. It was right about the 5. It knew nothing about the 6th. The light took shape in front of me, and it was a forge, a furnace of pure radiance, hanging in the air where I willed it, waiting on me. My grandfather's words were coming true in my hands years late. The skill that was mine and no one else's. The one too large to surface until I had made enough and mended enough and earned enough to hold it. A divine forge. The Worldsmith's true work. The thing my whole line had been for, sleeping in me the entire time. I set Lauren's scale into the fire. It did not melt so much as answer, drawing itself into a single ingot laced through with glowing sigils, far more than any furnace on earth should have drawn from one dragon's scale. I raised the old iron hammer over it. I spoke the words for the divine forge, and the invocation came to me whole, as if I had always known it, and I brought the hammer down. The ingot broke open into light and folded itself, blow after blow, into a blade. Not molten metal cooling into a shape, but light itself, condensing until a sword lay in the glow with an edge like the first thin line of morning breaking over a hill. A holy sword, made from nothing but a scale and every single thing I had ever done. Off to the side, Frost forgot the fight entirely and cried out what it was, that I had forged a holy sword from scratch, the way no craftsman in all of history had ever managed. The 8th of its kind, where the world had only ever held 7. The 7th had been a dark thing, a demon sword turned. This one was its opposite in every way. I lifted it, and its light ran down my arm and out across the wreckage and across the thing my brother had become. I gave it its name the way you greet something newly born. "Welcome," I said. "Your dawn, the sword of light." Somewhere under the glow, its spirit stirred for the first time, faint as a first breath. I had not forged it to end him. Every other fighter in that street was working out how to kill the monster. I had spent my darkest hour making the one thing that could give my brother back instead. The blade was ready. The light was ready. All that was left was to reach him with it. The monster that had been my brother reared back for one more blow, and I did the only thing I had made the sword to do. I did not aim for its heart. I brought dawn up between us and let the light run off the edge. It did not cut. That was the whole point of it. The light spilled off the blade and went looking for every broken thing in the street at once. The way water finds every low place the instant you pour it. Where it touched, the world simply stopped being ruined. A collapsed wall drew itself back up stone by stone. A snapped roof beam knit closed with no seam. The cracks that ran across the great square ran backward and sealed. Dust that had been a house lifted off the ground and became a house again. It was not fast and it was not slow. It was certain. The way a thing is certain when it has already happened and is only now being allowed to be true. I heard the monster make a sound I had never heard it make, not rage, something closer to fear. It swung a fist of woven limbs down at me to stop it, and I turned the blade a hand's width, and the blow came apart into nothing before it landed. Not blocked, undone. Whatever it destroyed, the sword said no, and the no was louder. I kept my feet planted in the wreckage that was busy forgetting it had ever been wreckage, and I looked up at the thing wearing the last shred of my brother's face, and I finally understood what I had forged in my darkest hour. Not a weapon that killed better than the others, the opposite of one. The monster screamed at me that it could not be, that there was no way at all, that I was this. Its voice cracked apart on the word. I did not answer it with a shout. I told it plainly what the sword was. "This is the negation of destruction," I said. "It undoes what was destroyed, any of it, all of it." Then I let it watch me prove the thing, because words had never once reached my brother, and I was tired of trying to make them. Off to the side, the S-rank adventurer, who had held the line before I got there, was propped against a fresh standing wall. Her whip lay dead across her knees. Her right arm hung at her side, whole to look at, but answering nothing. The craft pulled clean out of it by the monster hours ago. Ariel had gone down calling the thing a talentless creature that lived on what others earned, and it had put her down with her own stolen technique. I let the last of the light off the blade drift toward her. Her arm jerked once, on its own, the way a hand does when the feeling comes storming back into it. She grabbed her own wrist and stared. She flexed the fingers, slow, then fast, then made a fist so hard the knuckles went white. "It's back," she got out. "My arm. It's all the way back." Farther down the square, where a mother had been lost in the rampage, a small child had been kneeling in the dust and not moving for a long time. The light reached that place too. I made myself watch, because a man should watch what his hands do. A shape that was not there became there again. The child's wail turned over in the middle and became a different sound entirely. And then two people were holding onto each other in the street who had not both been alive a minute before. Caroline stood very still with the small white shape of Frost on her shoulder, and I heard the sword spirit's voice go thin with wonder. "This was not healing," Frost said. "Healing mends what is hurt. This unmakes the hurt from ever having been. This was reality being written over." Caroline asked her sword, quietly, whether she knew the technique. Frost did. She said it had belonged to one man in all the long history of the world, an ancient hero named Roland, who had stood between the human lands and the evil gods, and turned their ruin backward with a light exactly like this one. It had died with him. No one had wielded it since, because no one could. And now a plain-faced smith had grown it out of a scale and a hammer and a bad night, and reproduced the one miracle the world had agreed could never be repeated. I did not feel like a god of the forge. I felt like a man who had finally finished a long piece of work. But I heard the words start moving through the square behind me anyway, passed hand to hand, and I let them have it if they needed it. The monster heard all of it. I watched the truth go into it and find nothing to hold to. It had spent its whole cursed life certain it was owed more than me, and here was the proof, in light, that it never had been. It could not carry that. Nobody could have. So it went berserk one last time. Every limb it had left it threw upward at once, a whole black storm of them clawing for the sky, a creature trying to become large enough that the truth could not reach it. It was the loudest thing it had ever done, and the most afraid. I brought Dawn up over my head with both hands. I want to be honest about what this cost, because it is the part everyone leaves out of the story afterward. The sword was newborn. I could feel it in my palms. This small, stunned warmth, brand new to being alive and already asked to do the hardest thing a made thing has ever done. I asked it anyway. I am not proud of asking. I only knew that if I did not, my brother would keep tearing himself apart in front of me until there was nothing left to save. I spoke the last of the old hero's light into it, and I swung. The blaze went up and out past the walls of the district, past the walls of the capital, past anything I could see. It did not stop at the square. It did not stop at the city. Later, they told me it reached the far edges of the kingdom, every town and every road, and everywhere it went, it said the same quiet no to every wound the curse had ever caused. A whole country stitched itself back to before, and it went into my brother. It did not burn the monster. It unmade the monster. The black came off him the way the light had come off the blade, layer after layer, lifting away and simply ceasing to have ever been, until what stood in the settling glow was not a mass of curse-woven limbs at all. It was a slight, exhausted young man with soft, uncalloused hands, on his knees in the middle of the square, blinking up at the sky like someone waking out of a nightmare into a room he does not recognize. The light drew back into the blade, and the blade, its work done, went quiet in my hands. The warmth in it faded down and down until I could barely feel it. For one cold second, I thought I had asked too much and broken the newest thing I had ever made on its first day alive. Piper was at my shoulder by then. She looked at the still blade and asked, careful, whether it had broken. I held it up to the last of the light and looked. Then I let my breath go. No, I said, just sleeping, because that was all it was. A sword of light is an infant. It can only stay awake a little while before it has to rest, and this one had held a whole kingdom in its arms and then closed its eyes, the way anything that small does after it has spent everything it has. Somewhere down under the glow, I felt it breathe, slow and even. I let it sleep. My brother stayed on his knees in the clean square. For a long moment, he could not speak at all. He looked at his own soft hands, and at the city standing whole around him that he had brought down, and at me. All the denial he had carried since we were boys had nowhere left to stand. I watched it go out of him. Then he folded all the way down, forehead almost to the stone, lower than I had ever seen him bow to anyone, and he wept. "You were always greater than me," he said. His voice came out wrecked. "I knew it. I think I always knew it, and I couldn't. I hated you for it because I couldn't be it." He pressed his hands flat to the ground. "I took her from you. I took the shop. I drove you out of your own home, and I called it winning. Adrian, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. There's nothing you could do to me that would be too much." He had spent his whole life sure that being talentless was the worst thing a person could be. He had just found out it was not, and it had cost a kingdom to teach him. I stood there with the sleeping sword in one hand, and I waited for the old anger to come. I had earned it. Everyone in that square would have handed it to me, but the fire had gone quiet a long time ago. The day I picked up my grandfather's hammer and walked out of that house, and it did not come back now just because the man who lit it was finally kneeling in front of me. I crossed the clean stones and stood over him. He flinched, waiting for whatever I chose. I lifted the sleeping blade and brought the flat of it down, light, on the top of his head. A knock. The kind you give a boy who has done something stupid. Nothing more than that. There, I told him. That makes us even. He looked up at me like I had struck him harder than any real blow could. Then he broke all the way apart, both hands over his face, sobbing like the 19-year-old he actually was under all of it. Piper turned away to give him that much. I let him have it. I did not do it because he deserved it. He did not. I did it because the child his wife was carrying was going to need a father who was still alive, and because I had built too much in my life to start tearing things down now. I make things. I was not going to start with my brother. I was not in the cell for what came after. I heard how it went later, and it went like this. They took him to a holding cell to await sentencing, and there my brother sat, calm for the first time in his life. No curse in him and no lie left to tell. When his wife came to the bars, he did not make excuses. He told Serena flat out that he had been a fool who was never anything special, and that he was sorry, and that he would take every part of the blame himself so that she and the child would not have to wear any of it. He meant to fall alone. She railed at him through the bars, furious, telling him what a reckless good-for-nothing he was for all of it. And then, in the same breath, still crying, she told him she was not going anywhere. He was family. He was her husband and the father of her child. And family did not walk out just because the worst had come. Even to the scaffold, she said, she would not leave him, because he was certain that was where this ended. He told her, gently, to be ready for the death penalty. He had ruined a merchant house, stained a name, and become a monster that leveled the capital. Men had hanged for 100th of it. He had made his peace with paying the whole bill. They came for him in the morning and walked him up to hear the crown's judgment. He went up those stairs believing he had climbed them for the last time. The king pronounced the sentence, and it was not death, forfeiture of everything they owned, and exile from the kingdom. That was all. For a crime the whole city had watched with its own eyes, my brother was to lose his fortune and his home and walk out with his life and his wife and their child intact. He did not understand it. Neither did Serena. In a realm that hangs men for far less, no one hands a mercy like that out for nothing. So they asked why, and the weary old king told them the truth. The hero who saved the kingdom had come to him quietly before he left and asked for exactly one thing, not a title, not gold, not land, not thanks, not even to be named. He had asked the crown to spare this man and to take nothing from the world in exchange for the asking. Then he had refused every reward the king tried to press on him and walked out the gate before anyone could stop him. Thank that man, the king told them. He said he had rarely met anyone so noble in all his years on the throne, and that it grieved him to lose talent like that from the realm forever, and that the least they could do was understand what had been spent to keep them breathing. Serena put her hands over her mouth. Damon said my name once, out loud, in a voice that had nothing left in it and could not say anything after. They knew then who had reached down into the machine of the law and stopped it. They just did not know I was still close enough to see their faces when they found out. I was standing at the gate when they came through it. They did not know me. I had tapped my own face with the flat of my hammer that morning and worn another one over it, a bored gate guard's face, plain as a fence post. It is a small trick for a man who can remake a holy sword. I stood at my post in my borrowed face and watched my brother and his wife walk up to the edge of everything they had ever known, carrying one bag between them and Serena, with their newborn child held close against her. I told them, in the guard's flat voice, to wait there for the carriage that would carry them past the border. Then I told them I had a message for them, from the man who spared them. They went still. He wants you to know, I said, that he did not do it for your sake. He did it for the child, because the child is his own blood, distant but real, and no blood of his was going to grow up under a hanged father's shadow if he could help it. That was the whole of it. Not forgiveness bought and paid for, just a smith looking out for one small life that had not done anything yet. Serena started to cry again. Damon asked the guard, low, if he might somehow get one word to the hero, just to say. And I lifted my hammer and tapped the flat of it against my own cheek and let the borrowed face fall away. For a moment, neither of them breathed. Then my brother's whole face came apart because I was standing right there, close enough to touch, the one thing he had wanted and never expected. He reached for me. I did not step back, and I did not step in. I just let him see me. Piper came up the road then and stopped at my side and looked at the two of them and shook her head slowly. To save even the people who did all that to him, she said, mostly to herself. She was in awe of me, and she did not try to hide it, and I never quite knew what to do when she looked at me like that. I told my brother the only thing I had left to tell him, and it was not really about him at all. A made thing carries no sin, I said. A sword doesn't. A hammer doesn't. There's only what you choose to do with it. That was always the whole difference between us. Live, Damon. Do something better with your life than winning. Then I shouldered my grandfather's hammer, and I turned my back on the kingdom I had held up in secret for years, and I walked out through the gate with Piper beside me, toward roads I had never seen. I had mountains of things I still wanted to make. My best work was not behind me. It was not even the sword sleeping at my hip. It was still out there somewhere, waiting for me to reach it. I gave everything away and I owed no one anything. And for the first time in my life, that felt like being free instead of being used. I did not see the man on the rooftop. I want to be honest about that. Standing here now with everything I have learned since. Walking out that gate, I felt light. I felt done. I thought the hard part of my life was behind me and the making part was finally ahead. I did not feel the eyes on my back, and I did not know that the whole long chain of cursed things I had spent the arc undoing had never once been an accident. He watched me go from up there, a beautiful young man, no more than 20 by his face, long hair loose, his body wound about in pale wrapped cloth so that only that face showed, the ashen craftsman, the single patient hand behind every curse I had ever lifted, and I walked right under him and felt nothing. He watched me and Piper grow small on the road, and he smiled, and he said it soft to no one, the way a man speaks when a thing he has wanted for a very long time is finally in his hand. There he is, at last, the vessel, he almost laughed. I never once imagined old Gideon's grandson would grow into so perfect a vessel, but he will do. Oh, he will do beautifully. His voice dropped, warm with a patience older than it had any right to be. After all this waiting, my Worldsmith can finally be completed. I did not hear him. I just kept walking, with the sword of light sleeping at my side and the whole road open in front of me, thinking the story was over. It was only beginning.